The construction of our new home started. My husband unfortunately lost his job. He had agreed to contribute half of the mortgage, even considering taking on part-time work, but ultimately did not follow through with finding employment. Upon the completion of our new house, my husband proposed something quite daring. I've chosen to gift this house to my lovely niece as a wedding present. If you disagree with my idea, we can simply purchase another house. We should end our marriage right away. Surprised by his secret, I quickly agreed to divorce if that's what he wanted. John grinned, believing he had succeeded. After swiftly filing for divorce, he inquired about the division of property, which caused a noticeable shift in his attitude once I revealed that I knew his secret. With the help of another person, his original plan veered off course, resulting in a remarkable turn of events. We had been married for 3 years. Next year, I will be celebrating my 30th birthday, and my husband, who is in his mid-30s, talked about the possibility of having children. Given the physical demands of childbirth and the unpredictability of our current health, I decided to have children before reaching my mid-30s and discussed it with my husband. He recommended taking time before starting a family. If it felt overwhelming, he mentioned wanting children, but recognized that our current home was too small for a family, suggesting we think about purchasing a house. Raising children involves significant financial commitments, and purchasing a home may entail almost 3 decades of mortgage payments. By that time, my husband will probably be in his mid-60s and retired. I wanted to avoid placing any financial strain on our children. My mother balanced a full-time job with raising me, taking care of the house, and supporting my father until she retired. I always looked up to her and chose to balance work with taking care of the home. With determination, we meticulously planned for our home, selecting a builder and initiating our new home project. Luckily, we had some savings, so we opted to increase our down payment to prevent any potential mortgage difficulties down the road. Right when everything seemed to be falling into place, my husband's company went bankrupt, leaving him without a job or any severance pay. I asked him if there were any signs of the company's impending failure, but he snapped back, saying he couldn't have known since he wasn't an executive. One morning, he found himself unable to enter his workplace due to a notice announcing the company's bankruptcy the day before. It was a small company, and it appeared that the president and other responsible parties had disappeared overnight, without even leaving that month's salary. Considering the uncertain future, I proposed that we think about buying the house, but my husband was adamant about moving forward since we had already made significant progress. Because of his strong motivation to secure a new job quickly, I decided to pause the plan. He was hopeful about swiftly securing a new job. We chose to proceed with our plan after he landed a new job. He began frequenting the job center and eagerly looking for jobs online. My spouse also secured some temporary employment while searching for a permanent job, but it was on a call basis and unpredictable. His willingness to share the mortgage payments and dedication to doing so eased my mind, especially since my income was steady and we could handle things without his help for now. I've made the decision to proceed with our home project. So far, my husband may appear dedicated and responsible, but he has a peculiar obsession with his niece, the daughter of his much older sister. She became a mother at a young age, and my husband, who became an uncle early on, showered his niece with love and attention. Even though they lived far apart, during occasional visits, he would generously send expensive gifts and give her money that exceeded expectations. On one occasion, he even surprised her with a Christmas present of $1,000, which I thought was too much. When unexpected expenses arose, he chose to prioritize gifts for his niece over our budget, causing me to question his priorities. His kindness toward his niece often left me dismayed. Currently without a job, he didn't use our savings for his niece, but spent extended periods outside, supposedly looking for work, coming back home later than when he had a job. Although his enthusiasm to secure a job was admirable, he started to neglect our home project, leaving all decisions to me. He requested that I take care of all the paperwork, with the intention of having only his name on the joint ownership. I kindly prompted him to take an interest in our home, and he reacted with frustration, mentioning his exhaustion from searching for a job. I was concerned that he might later claim that because I made all the decisions, I should be accountable for the mortgage payments. When discussing payment arrangements, he preferred to maintain his personal savings until securing a job, focusing on future emergencies rather than immediate needs. He strongly suggested that I take over the mortgage payments for now, which seemed much more convenient for him than our original agreement. I asked him to sign a loan agreement for the duration I would be covering the mortgage, wanting to establish my position. He kept expressing his concerns, but eventually agreed when he understood that pushing him about his job search could cause problems. John has promised to reimburse me for half of the mortgage payments I covered while he was unemployed once he finds a new job. I managed to obtain his signature on the agreement and kept it safe in a place where he wouldn't stumble upon it. However, there were several occasions when the commitments we first made unraveled before our new home was finished. First, John, who had mentioned he would secure a job swiftly and wouldn't be selective, struggled to find employment as the completion of our new home neared. In addition, he turned down multiple offers from the temp agency he signed up with, providing different reasons. Hated the idea of supporting a husband who made no effort, so I pressed him to find a job many times, but he always dodged the issue, leading to more arguments. During this time, our new home was finished and prepared for us to move in. However, given the circumstances, the idea of moving in with John appeared challenging. Actually, I had collected different pieces of information since he lost his job, such as his ongoing struggle to secure employment. I have several things I'd like to confirm and discuss. When John was heading to the job center, I went up to him as usual. "Would you like to spend today with me?" I mentioned to him that there was something important I wanted to discuss. John attempted to steer the conversation away, emphasizing that securing a job was his main focus. He suggested discussing it later, pointing out that skipping a day at the job center wouldn't make a difference, especially since it was uncertain if he had any interviews lined up. I stood my ground, insisting that he pay attention to me. John made a bold statement. "A nagging woman isn't cute. You know what? Hey, I have something to share with you as well." I thought I could be patient, but since it's positive news, now is the perfect moment. My niece is getting married, and I've chosen to gift her the new home. We can divide the mortgage and continue making payments jointly. I was surprised by his generous gestures towards his niece in the past, but giving her a whole house, why did he decide on something so important without talking to me beforehand? This was the first time I heard about his niece's upcoming wedding. "I haven't consented to this. Is this a decision you can make independently?" Inquired further. After that, John threatened divorce if I disagreed. He mentioned the idea of constructing a new home, but there has been no progress so far. He was unable to find a job. However, he continued to make vague commitments about securing employment. Although his words seemed believable, his behavior did not align. I chuckled in amazement at his words, as I had already expected his outlandish idea of giving a whole house to his niece. That matter must be related, right? I was curious to see his reaction, so I asked him a lot of questions. "Are you kidding? Currently, I am not employed. You're generously giving your niece a house that still has a mortgage on it. Do you think she'd be pleased with that? How could someone think of giving away a house that we're still paying a 30-year mortgage on? Furthermore, presenting a house with an outstanding mortgage as a gift for a celebration appears to be transferring a significant financial responsibility, which is quite shocking. I'd also inquired about what this meant for our plans to start a family, considering we bought the house for when our family expands. John confidently replied to my questions, stating he wouldn't be affected by a divorce. He'd avoided answering my questions and only mentioned the possibility of divorce without providing any explanation. It felt like we were from different worlds, making conversation nearly impossible. There were several topics I had planned to talk about, but it turned out that John was more difficult than I had expected. I was considering discussing divorce, so I quickly agreed to his suggestion.
If you agree to my terms, including leaving the house and finalizing our divorce, I will listen to anything, John said. You can go ahead and file the divorce papers first. But I prefer to settle the division of property after the divorce is officially finalized. I also want to get ready for living on my own, so let's sort everything out once you calm down, I told him. John was amenable, stating he would adhere to my requests as long as he could initiate divorce proceedings right away. Actually, my intention to get ready for living alone was just an excuse. I have one more thing to take care of. I informed John that I required some time to get ready for living by myself as a tactic to delay without him catching on. After some time, I finished all my pending tasks and was just waiting for the perfect time to reach out to John. Then, maybe feeling a bit antsy or stumbling upon something, he reached out to me initially. How can I help you today? Why is our new home being listed for sale? That was meant to be a present for my niece, and it's something we both own anyway. He was upset over the phone, accusing me of selling our jointly owned home without his knowledge and refusing to listen to anything I had to say. After allowing him to express his feelings, I replied, I was aware that you were attempting to shift all the payments onto me. Did you actually believe it was still jointly owned? You seemed very eager to get a divorce. I assumed you would have double-checked that detail. When you requested joint ownership, it was arranged accordingly. But I decided to change the ownership because I was concerned that he would avoid payments and try to claim the house as his own. After the house was completed, he began acting strangely, believing he could keep his true intentions hidden. He adamantly claimed the house was for his niece, convinced that no one suspected him. I managed to pay off the entire mortgage using my savings. Little did John know, my parents had sold the land inherited from my grandfather to provide cash for a payment. My parents always preferred purchasing things outright instead of taking out loans, which they considered to be uncertain and risky. They helped me out financially so I could purchase the house outright. I had thought about taking their advice, but then John lost his job. Worried that his behavior might worsen if he found out about the money, I chose to stay quiet. Furthermore, I questioned whether he would reimburse me if I paid for everything. I refrained from informing him to avoid overshadowing my parents' kindness. John was very upset when he found out about the ownership change and blamed me for not keeping our promise about the house. Is the house still standing? Is it still intact and suitable for living? Don't worry about it if it ends up in someone else's hands. If you truly desire it, you have the option to repurchase it. I believe I had the freedom to make decisions about the house I owned outright, but residing in a home designed by an ex-spouse didn't sit well with me. John, feeling upset by my statement, asserted his entitlement to a portion of the proceeds as marital property. He requested a prompt share, ensuring to verify the exact amount later. I asked him to meet up, mentioning that I had more information to share. Arriving early at the agreed-upon location, I waited for him. When John arrived and started talking, I revealed something that caused him to stop speaking abruptly, the findings of a private investigator's investigation into his behavior. The report contained evidence of his extramarital relationship, featuring prominent photos of him kissing another woman in public, dining out at upscale restaurants, and entering hotels. It was mentioned that even though John had initially searched for a job after losing his job, he eventually started meeting the other women frequently, stating that he was single and having difficulty finding work because of the recession, which made her feel sympathetic towards him. He appealed to her sympathy and persuaded her of his financial struggles, which ultimately led her to provide him with financial assistance, behaving in a way similar to a con artist proposing marriage. I felt unwell upon discovering that he had intensified divorce discussions due to his frustration with various issues, such as the mortgage and his lack of empathy. The other woman was more accommodating and understanding, making it easier for him to control her compared to me, intending to replace me with her. The tale of giving the house was simply a strategy to speed up our divorce, an excuse he believed he could use if I declined. However, he was incorrect in believing he had influenced me. Actually, I was the one behind it all. I decided to hire a private investigator after noticing John's unusual actions and learning about his unfaithfulness. His reason for giving the house to his niece caught me off guard, but I had already made up my mind to divorce him when I found out about his affair. I wanted to chat about this issue with John before we settled into our new place. At first, I intended to talk to him about his unfaithfulness and let him know that I wanted a divorce. Despite his irrational behavior, I noticed he was unable to engage in a reasonable conversation. I chose to let him believe he was in control while I strategized my next moves behind the scenes. I confronted John with all the evidence I had gathered. "I have concrete proof of your affair. Given all this evidence, it's impossible to argue your way out of it. I will be seeking compensation from you. You were aware but chose not to speak up. What sort of person does that make you, choosing to remain quiet about your spouse's unfaithfulness? Hey there, was it you who betrayed me?" John's assertion of being a cherished husband was quite ridiculous, prompting me to scoff in response. He tripped over his words before reiterating his claim to a portion of the assets. That's when I decided to reach out to John's father as a final option. I let him know that John was requesting a division of assets. John began passionately explaining why I should include his father. But when I mentioned his father wanted to talk to him, he stopped abruptly. I handed the phone to John on speaker so he could hear his father reprimanding him. His father reprimanded him for his behavior, questioning how a man in his 30s could act so shamefully, and criticizing him for causing family breakdown while still demanding a share of assets. John has always had a challenging relationship with his father, finding it difficult to stand up to him since he was young. His father strongly dislikes dishonesty, especially when it involves hurting or deceiving others. After John proposed to divorce, I quickly reached out to John's father for advice, seeking assistance if I couldn't resolve it on my own. He encouraged me to leave my cheating husband and assured me he would talk to John. However, I had many things I wanted to say to John myself. Fearing he might run away if his father intervened, I chose not to speak. I wanted time after our divorce to coordinate with John's father and make sure John didn't find out about the house sale. Additionally, I wanted to clarify John's relationship with his niece and decided to call John's sister while John's father was present. I directly inquired whether her daughter had ever received expensive gifts or large sums of money from John, and she answered in the negative. John's sister noted that whenever John was invited to birthday parties, he always showed up without bringing any gifts, just inexpensive cars. My niece was completely unaware of the supposed marriage or the house gift, and she found it ridiculous and unwelcome. John's father and John's sister were also unaware of John's supposed affection for his niece. Where did all the money John said he spent on his niece disappear? John's sister proceeded to share important details about John's history. At the age of 20, he was detained during a police raid at an illegal casino. Confronted by his father's disapproval, John begged his mother to keep it between them, confessing to trading valuable items for money. Despite his pledge to stop, his addiction appeared to be pathological. John's father noticed some missing items from their storage and decided to address John's gambling habits while expressing concern for his niece. "Are you using your niece as a cover for your gambling? Despite being unemployed, you still engage in gambling." He instructed John to return home for a serious re-education, emphasizing that the asset division is not intended for funding bets. John reluctantly agreed to his father's terms, giving up any rights to assets and agreeing to provide compensation. Thanks to John's father's help, a lawyer he connected me with verified that John had given up his rights to any shared property, enabling me to obtain all communal assets. Moreover, Thanks to John's father's thoughtfulness, I was given a lump sum inconvenience fee from John, which was well above the standard rate. Initially, I felt anger towards John's affair partner. However, as the investigation into John's behavior extended to her, my feelings shifted. She thought John was not in a relationship and facing financial difficulties, so she offered him financial assistance despite her own money troubles. I realized she was also being manipulated by John. Even though she was tricked, she showed regret for the possible impact on my family and tearfully said sorry. She kindly offered a small sum of money as compensation, which I declined, grateful for her sentiment. I let her know that, as another victim of John's deceit, she might be eligible for some compensation, clarifying that when someone promises marriage while also making financial demands, it could be considered fraudulent. She promptly acted on this advice. During the confrontation at John's parents' house, when she accused him of using marriage as bait, John's father became furious. He recommended that she file a police report and insisted that John surrender himself right away, which created quite a stir. John humbly asked for forgiveness from his affair partner and his father, promising to return all the money he had swindled to prevent police intervention. His limited savings were entirely used up in repaying his affair partner and handling the damages, leaving him with no money. After retiring, John's father had ample time to keep a close eye on John, enforcing strict supervision that made a prison seem lenient. John's efforts to evade the surveillance were brief. He returned to his father's doorstep within 2 days due to hunger. John's father was upset by John's indecisiveness about staying or leaving, leading him to disown John and express his disappointment. Now that the house is sold and I have the proceeds, I'm looking forward to investing in some personal rejuvenation. I secured a top-floor apartment in a building I've always dreamed of living in. I look forward to savoring the view, indulging in delicious food, and cherishing the time away from John, recognizing the years spent together.
The Anderson retail headquarters gleamed in the morning sun, 50 stories of glass and steel reaching into the Chicago skyline. I stood in my brother Mark's new office, formerly our father's office, and tried to keep my expression neutral as he delivered the news of my termination. My name is Sarah Anderson, and at 33, I had just watched my family's legacy, my life's work, and my revolutionary retail management system be stolen by my own brother. It's nothing personal, Sarah, Mark said, leaning back in Dad's leather chair, the same chair where our father had sat 6 months ago, before his stroke, telling me how proud he was of my innovations. The board feels the company needs stronger leadership in the tech division. I glanced at the digital clock on his desk, 9:47 a.m. In exactly 24 hours, he would be presenting his new retail management system to the board. The system I'd spent 3 years developing. The system that could revolutionize how major retailers handle everything from inventory to customer data. Of course, I said mildly, I understand completely. Mark's smile faltered slightly. He'd expected tears, protests, maybe even threats. After all, I was the emotional one in the family, according to him. The one who cared too much about employees, who wanted to revolutionize retail for more than just profit. Security will escort you to clear out your office, he continued, regaining his composure. Standard procedure, you understand. We wouldn't want any sensitive information leaving the building. I thought about the small camera hidden in my office plant, the one that had been recording his late-night meetings for the past 3 months. The midnight conversations with board members, the promises of increased profits if they supported his takeover, the methodical way he planned to steal my work and push me out. Of course not, I agreed, though I'm sure you've already secured all the important files. Everything related to the new system is safely under company control, he said smugly. Your personal access has been revoked. He meant the official servers, the documented development files. What he didn't know about was the hidden backend I'd built into the system, the fail-safes I'd implemented when I first noticed files being copied late at night. Congratulations on the presentation tomorrow, I said, standing up. I'm sure the board will be very impressed. They will be, he said, then added with fake sympathy, I know this is hard, but you'll land on your feet. Maybe a smaller company would be more your speed, somewhere less demanding. I shouldered my bag, thinking about the encrypted drive in my apartment containing footage of every meeting where he'd plotted this takeover. You're probably right. Anderson Retail might be too big for someone like me. The security guard, Jim, who'd watched me grow up in this building, gave me an apologetic look as he escorted me to my office. This isn't right, Miss Sarah, he muttered. It's okay, Jim, I said as I began packing my personal items. Everything happens for a reason. My office overlooked Michigan Avenue, the same view I'd had since joining the company fresh out of MIT. While the security guard wasn't looking, I quickly retrieved the hidden camera from the Peace Lily, Dad's gift when I was promoted to head of technology 3 years ago. Need help with those boxes, Miss Sarah? Jim asked as I finished packing. No thanks, Jim, but could you do me a favor? Could you make sure my plant gets a good home? Maybe in the security office? It needs water every 3 days. Jim nodded, understanding in his eyes. He'd been here 30 years, had seen the way things had changed since Dad's stroke. I'll take good care of it, he promised. In the elevator, I checked my phone. 3 messages from Lisa, my lead developer. They're locking us out of the system. Mark's team is taking over everything. What do we do? I typed back, stick to the plan. See you at the usual place tonight. The lobby was busy with morning traffic, employees hurrying to their offices, unaware that the company they worked for was about to change forever. Janet, the receptionist who'd given me candy when I visited Dad as a child, wiped away tears as I handed in my security badge. This isn't what your father would have wanted, she whispered. I know, I said. But sometimes things have to break before they can be fixed properly. Outside, Chicago's spring air was crisp and full of promise. I walked to the corner where my car was parked, placed my box of belongings in the trunk, and pulled out my other phone, the secure one that even Mark didn't know about. A text from my contact at the SEC. Documentation received. Extremely interesting reading. Meeting still on for 3 p.m. Confirmed, I replied, bringing additional evidence. That evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing the video footage from the hidden camera. Mark's face glowed with triumph as he outlined his plan to various board members. Sarah's too soft for this business. The system needs a stronger hand. Think of the profit margins if we implement it my way. Of course, I developed the core concepts. I just let her handle the technical details. My laptop pinged, an alert from the hidden backend I built into the system. Mark's team was trying to modify the source code, probably removing my digital fingerprints. Little did they know that every change they made was being logged, every attempt to alter the documentation creating an unalterable record of their tampering. My phone buzzed. Lisa calling. Everyone's in position, she reported. The team is ready. But Sarah, are you sure about this? Once we do this. There's no going back, I finished. I know, but Mark left us no choice. He's not just stealing my work. He's planning to turn the system into something it was never meant to be. Something that would hurt thousands of employees, millions of customers. Your father would be proud, Lisa said quietly. I looked at the photo on my wall. Dad and me at my MIT graduation, his face beaming with pride. He'd built Anderson Retail from a single store into a national chain, but he'd never lost sight of what mattered. The people who made it work. Tomorrow's going to be interesting, I said. Make sure everyone's ready. After hanging up, I walked to my home office and opened the hidden wall safe. Inside was the evidence I'd been gathering for months. Financial records showing Mark's manipulation of company funds, documentation of his secret meetings with competitors, and most importantly, the original development logs of my retail management system. I pulled out Dad's letter, the one he'd written just before his stroke, the one Mark didn't know existed. Tomorrow, its contents would change everything. The next morning, I dressed carefully in my best suit, the one Dad had bought me when I became head of technology. As I fastened my mother's pearl necklace, I thought about legacy, about responsibility, about the right way to run a business. My phone buzzed. Board meeting starts in 1 hour. Everything is in place. I smiled at my reflection. Mark thought he'd won, thought he'd successfully stolen everything I'd built. He had no idea that his moment of triumph was about to become something very different. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't just exposing the truth. It's letting your enemies present their own lies to the very people they're trying to deceive. I grabbed my laptop and headed for the door. It was time to show my brother exactly who he'd underestimated. Anderson Retail's main conference room was packed with board members, executives, and major shareholders. I slipped in quietly just as Mark began his presentation, taking a seat at the back where my brother's triumph would have the perfect view of its own undoing. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark began, standing at the head of the long table in an expertly tailored suit. Today marks a new era for Anderson Retail. What I'm about to show you will revolutionize not just our company, but the entire retail industry. I opened my laptop silently, connecting to the room's wireless network. Lisa's text appeared. Backend access confirmed. Ready when you are. This retail management system, Mark continued, clicking to his first slide, represents thousands of hours of development, a seamless integration of inventory management, customer data, and predictive analytics. My fingers moved across the keyboard, accessing the hidden protocols I built into the system. On the screen behind Mark, his presentation continued flawlessly. He had no idea that every click was being logged, every demonstration creating an unalterable record. The potential for profit maximization is unprecedented, he said, warming to his theme. By implementing aggressive data collection and dynamic pricing, we can increase margins by up to 40%. Several board members nodded approvingly. They didn't understand that what Mark was proposing would turn my system, designed to balance efficiency with ethical business practices, into a tool for exploiting both employees and customers. Question, called out Janet Chen, one of the newer board members. The privacy implications of this level of data collection are completely manageable, Mark interrupted smoothly. The technical details aren't important right now. What matters is the bottom line. I pressed enter. On my screen, a message flashed. Original documentation uploaded. Timestamp development logs active. Let me demonstrate the system's capabilities, Mark said, turning to the main display. He clicked confidently, expecting to show a carefully curated demo. Instead, the screen shifted to show side-by-side comparisons. The original ethical design specifications I developed, next to Mark's modified versions showing how he planned to exploit the system. What? Mark clicked frantically, but the presentation was no longer under his control. Interesting modifications, I said, standing up. All heads turned, especially the parts where you removed all the employee protection protocols and customer privacy safeguards. There must be a technical glitch, Mark stammered. Security. They can't help, I said calmly. The system is responding exactly as it was designed to, by me, its original creator. The room erupted in murmurs. I walked to the front, each step measured and confident. Board members of Anderson Retail, I began, what my brother has shown you is a corrupted version of a system I spent 3 years developing. A system designed to modernize retail while protecting the rights of employees and customers. A system our father approved and supported. She's lying, Mark snapped. I developed. Really? I pressed another key. The hidden camera footage began playing. Mark in late-night meetings, plotting his takeover, admitting to stealing my work. That's illegal surveillance, he sputtered. Actually, said a new voice from the doorway, it's evidence in a federal investigation. Special Agent Sarah Torres from the SEC stepped into the room, followed by 2 colleagues. Mark Anderson, we have some questions about certain financial transactions related to this software development. Mark's face went from red to white. This is ridiculous. I am the CEO. According to company bylaws, interrupted Howard Chen, the head of the board's legal committee, your interim CEO, pending review after your father's recovery. He held up a document, a recovery that, according to his doctors, has progressed significantly. In fact, we received this letter from him this morning. I smiled, remembering Dad's face when I visited him at the rehabilitation center last week, showing him the evidence of Mark's betrayal. His hand had been steady as he'd signed the letter revoking Mark's interim authority. The original system documentation, I said, distributing tablets to the board members, shows exactly how the development proceeded. You'll also find evidence of how Mark attempted to modify it for unethical purposes, along with records of his financial misconduct. The board members scrolled through the documents, their expressions darkening. Mark looked around wildly, finding no allies. You don't understand, he tried. The profit potential is substantial even without exploiting people, I cut in. The system as originally designed would increase efficiency by 30% while improving employee satisfaction and customer loyalty. I have 3 years of test data proving it. Which is why, Howard Chen said, the board will be calling an emergency session to review leadership of both the company and this project. The next hour was a blur of SEC interviews, board discussions, and security escorting Mark from the building. I sat in Dad's office, Mark's office for such a short time, looking at the city sprawled below. Miss Sarah. Jim the security guard stood at the door. Your father's here. Dad walked in slowly, leaning on his cane, but his eyes were clear and sharp. I always knew, he said, settling into his old chair, that you were the one who truly understood this business. The way you built it, I said, not just for profit, but for people. He nodded. Mark never understood that. Success without ethics isn't success at all. The next few weeks were intense. The board unanimously voted to reinstate Dad as CEO, with me as Chief Technology Officer and heir apparent. Mark faced SEC investigations and criminal charges. The system rollout proceeded as originally designed, earning praise from both industry analysts and workers' rights groups. 1 month after the board meeting, I sat in my new office, not Dad's, but one with an even better view of the city. Lisa knocked on the door. The first quarter results are in, she announced, grinning. Employee satisfaction up 42%. Customer retention improved by 35%. And profits, she paused dramatically, exceeded all projections. Send them to Mark, I said, in his new office. The Federal Investigation Office. He never understood. I said that doing the right thing could also be the profitable thing. Dad stopped by later that day, moving better now after months of rehabilitation. Your mother would be proud, he said, looking at her picture on my desk. She always said you had my head for business and her heart for people. I thought about legacy then, not just the buildings and profits, but the impact we have on lives. Mark had wanted to build an empire. I wanted to build something that mattered. Last week, I received an invitation to speak at a retail industry conference. The topic? Ethical innovation, the future of retail technology. I thought about Mark sitting in his prison cell after his conviction for fraud and corporate espionage and realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about building something so meaningful that their attempts to destroy it only make it stronger. The Anderson retail headquarters still gleams in the morning sun, but it's different now. Employees smile more. Customers praise our service. The board talks about ethics as much as profits. And every morning when I walk through the lobby, Janet still offers me candy, just like she did when I was a little girl who dreamed of making her father proud. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in the moment of triumph, but in what you build after the battle is won. Mark tried to steal my work, but he could never steal my vision, because true success isn't just about power or profit. It's about creating something that makes the world a little better than you found it. That's what Dad taught me, that's what I proved, and that's the real legacy I'll carry forward. The security camera footage from my office plant still sits in my safe, a reminder that sometimes the best defense against betrayal is simply letting people reveal their true nature. But I don't watch it anymore. I'm too busy building something better. After all, success is the best revenge, but only if you succeed in the right way. And as I review plans for expanding our ethical retail system nationwide, I know that the right way was worth fighting for. Because in the end, it's not about who wins or loses. It's about how you change the game itself. The rain fell softly on the day we buried my grandmother, Eleanor Rose, the last link to my mother's family and owner of what my in-laws dismissively called that dusty old junk shop on Main Street. What Rose Antiquities lacked in modern glamour, it made up for in character. 3 floors of carefully curated history that had been my second home since childhood. My name is Emma Taylor, and this is the story of how my grandmother's worthless antique shop turned out to be worth more than anyone could have imagined, in ways that went far beyond mere money. Really, Emma, my mother-in-law Barbara said as we left the funeral, her designer umbrella held carefully away from her expensive suit. You can't possibly be thinking of keeping that old shop. It's taking up prime real estate in the historic district. The smart thing would be to sell to developers. I clutched the shop's keys tighter in my pocket. Grandma Eleanor had given them to me a week before she passed, along with a cryptic message I was still trying to understand. The real treasure isn't always what it appears to be, dear. Sometimes you have to know where to look. The shop stays, I said firmly. My husband Michael shifted uncomfortably beside me, caught as usual between his wife and his mother. But darling, Barbara persisted, you have a career in finance to think about. Managing a failing antique shop is hardly. I said no. My voice came out sharper than intended, drawing looks from other funeral guests. But I couldn't help it. The shop was all I had left of both my grandmother and my mother, who had died in a car accident when I was 12. Eleanor had raised me among those antiques, teaching me the stories behind each piece, training my eye to spot quality and craftsmanship. That evening, after the mourners had gone home and Michael had taken his parents back to their hotel, I went to the shop alone. The bell above the door chimed softly as I entered, its familiar tone bringing tears to my eyes. Everything was exactly as Grandma had left it. The Louis XV chair she'd been restoring still sat in her workspace, the ledger still neat on her desk, the displays still perfectly arranged. I made my way to her office in the back, remembering all the afternoons I'd spent there doing homework while she worked. The old roll-top desk stood against the wall, its surface covered with papers and catalog references. As I began sorting through them, a leather-bound book caught my eye. It wasn't one of the shop's regular ledgers. This one was older, its pages yellowed with age. Inside, in my grandmother's elegant handwriting, was a catalog unlike anything I'd seen before. Each entry detailed not just items and prices, but complex codes and references I didn't understand. Some entries had stars next to them. Others had letters that seemed to correspond to nothing in the shop's inventory. "Oh, Grandma," I whispered, "what were you up to?" A knock at the shop's front door made me jump. Through the glass, I could see Dr. Marcus Chen from the university's history department, one of Grandma's regular customers and closest friends. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Emma," he said when I let him in, "but Eleanor asked me to come. She left something for you with me to be delivered after. He handed me an envelope, thick with what felt like a key inside. "She said you'd need this once you found her special ledger." My hand trembled as I opened it. Inside was indeed a key, old, brass, intricately carved, and a letter. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then you found my real inventory book, and Marcus has kept his promise to deliver this key. What I'm about to tell you must be kept secret for now. There are people who wouldn't understand what I've spent my life protecting. Rose Antiquities isn't just an antique shop. It's a safe house for some of history's most significant lost treasures. Your grandfather and I started this work in 1962, helping European museums recover artwork that had been stolen during World War II. Over the years, it evolved into something bigger. The coded entries in my ledger, those are the real items, hidden in plain sight among the regular inventory. The stars mark pieces that museums and collectors have been searching for decades. The letters correspond to their true provenance. But you have to be careful. There are people who have suspected what we do, the Carmichael family in particular. They've been trying to buy the shop for years, not for the real estate, but because they think they know what's hidden here. The key opens a hidden room in the basement. Take Marcus with you when you go down. He knows about some of the pieces, and you'll need his expertise to understand the full scope of what's there. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you this while I was alive. It was safer for you not to know. But you're ready now. You've always had the eye for it, even as a child. Remember when you spotted that fake Tiffany lamp at the Anderson estate sale? You were only 10, but you knew something wasn't quite right about the glass work. Be careful who you trust, and whatever you do, don't let anyone pressure you into selling, especially not the Carmichaels. All my love, Grandma Eleanor. P.S. That Louis XV chair I was restoring. Look under the seat cushion. The papers there will explain everything about the Vermeer. I looked up at Marcus, my mind spinning. The Vermeer? As in Johannes Vermeer? The Dutch master? He nodded gravely. Perhaps we should check the basement before we discuss this further. The walls here, they have ears. Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from Michael. Mom's insisting on coming by the shop tomorrow morning to help you catalog everything for the estate sale. I tried to tell her no, but you know how she gets. I looked at Marcus, then at the key in my hand. How long will it take to see what's in the basement? Several hours at least. Some of these pieces, they'll need careful documentation. Then we better get started. Barbara Winston isn't known for her patience, and tomorrow morning she's going to learn that her daughter-in-law's worthless inheritance is anything but junk. As we headed toward the basement door, I could have sworn I heard Grandma Eleanor's soft chuckle among the antiques. The real adventure was about to begin. The basement key turned with a soft click that seemed to echo through the silent shop. Marcus held the flashlight steady as we descended the narrow stairs, past the regular storage area I'd known all my life, to a section of wall that had always looked perfectly ordinary. "Your grandmother was brilliant with hiding things in plain sight," Marcus said, running his hands along the wooden paneling. "Most people never realize that this wall doesn't match the building's actual dimensions." The hidden door blended so perfectly that even knowing it was there, I barely saw the seam. It swung open silently, revealing a climate-controlled room that stretched nearly the length of the building. "Oh my God," I whispered as Marcus found the light switch. The room was a museum-quality storage facility. Temperature and humidity monitors blinked steadily on the walls. Carefully labeled crates lined industrial shelving units. Paintings hung on specialized racks. Display cases held smaller items, each one tagged with the same coding system I'd seen in Grandma's ledger. "Start with the chair," Marcus suggested. "The Vermeer connection is significant. I found the Lewis XV chair where we carried it down last week for Grandma's restoration." The cushion lifted easily, revealing a hidden compartment containing a thick file and what looked like original provenance documents from the 1940s. During World War II, Marcus explained as I read, many Jewish families in Amsterdam hid their valuable artworks before fleeing. One family had a Vermeer, a previously unknown work. They disassembled the frame, hid the canvas inside this chair, and sent it to America with other furniture. Your grandparents helped track down the family's heirs. But this documentation, it's about more than just one painting. Eleanor and Robert, your grandfather, they built a network. Museums, art historians, legitimate dealers, all working to recover lost art and artifacts. This shop became a safe waypoint. Items could be hidden here, documented, authenticated, and returned to their rightful owners. I moved through the room in a daze, matching codes from the ledger to items on the shelves. Each piece had a story. Ancient artifacts looted from archaeological sites, artwork stolen by the Nazis, cultural treasures taken during colonial periods. "The Carmichaels," I said suddenly, remembering Grandma's warning. "They know about this. They suspect Gregory Carmichael's father was involved in some questionable acquisitions. He's been trying to find evidence of lost pieces for years. That's why they keep trying to buy the building." My phone buzzed again. Another text from Michael. "Mom's determined to come by first thing tomorrow. Says she's already called an estate liquidator." I looked at my watch. 11:30 p.m. "How many people do you trust completely to help us document all this tonight?" Marcus was already on his phone. "I can have a small team here in 30 minutes. All vetted. All who worked with Eleanor before." The next 8 hours were a blur of careful photography, detailed documentation, and incredible discoveries. Dr. Sarah Williams from the Metropolitan Museum's Authentication Department arrived at midnight. Professor James Chen, Marcus's brother, from the Smithsonian joined us at 2 a.m. Each new finding left them more amazed. "This Buddha statue," Sarah whispered, examining a seemingly modest bronze figure. "It was looted from a temple in Myanmar in 1945. Museums have been searching for it for decades. The provenance papers are all here," I said, checking the ledger. Grandma was helping the temple reclaim it. James was carefully examining a collection of Native American artifacts. These were stolen from a reservation museum in 1972. The tribe has been trying to recover them ever since. By 7 a.m., we had preliminary documentation of over 200 significant pieces. Their combined value was staggering, but more importantly, each item represented a piece of history that could finally be returned to its rightful owners. At 8:30 a.m. sharp, the shop's bell chimed. Barbara Winston's voice carried down the stairs. "Emma, we're here to help you start clearing out this mess." I met them in the main shop area, where Barbara was already placing post-it notes on pieces she deemed salvageable for the estate sale. Michael stood awkwardly by the door while his mother took control. "I've called Harrison's auction house," she announced. "They can clear everything out by next week. Though honestly, most of this should probably just go to Goodwill." "That won't be necessary," I said calmly. I've already had the inventory evaluated. Oh, honey, she laughed. I know you're attached to your grandmother's little collection, but we need to be realistic about Mrs. Winston. Sarah Williams appeared from the basement stairway, her Metropolitan Museum ID badge clearly visible. I'm Dr. Williams, head of authentication at the Met. We're going to need you to step away from that salvageable piece you just tagged. It's a 15th century Italian devotional piece that was looted from a church in Florence in 1944. Barbara's hand jerked back from the small wooden panel as if it had burned her. What? Emma, James Chen called from the basement door. The Smithsonian's director is on FaceTime. He'd like to discuss the Native American artifacts. Michael found his voice first. Emma, what's going on? I held up Grandma's ledger. Rose Antiquities wasn't just an antique shop. It was a safe house for recovering stolen art and artifacts. Grandma and Grandpa spent 50 years helping return lost treasures to their rightful owners. But that's impossible, Barbara sputtered. Eleanor was just a small-town antique dealer. Actually, Marcus said, emerging with a familiar-looking folder. She was one of the most respected art recovery experts in the world. She just preferred to work quietly. He opened the folder, revealing newspaper clippings dating back to the 1960s, stories of mysterious recoveries of lost artworks, each one mentioning an anonymous American source. The shop stays, I said firmly, and the work continues. Just then, the bell chimed again. Gregory Carmichael strode in, his usual air of entitled confidence firmly in place. Ah, Emma, I heard about Eleanor's passing. I have some papers for you to sign. A very generous offer for the property. Mr. Carmichael, I smiled, channeling a bit of Grandma Eleanor's steel. I believe you know Dr. Chen from the Smithsonian. He was just cataloging some interesting pieces, including several that match the descriptions of items your father acquired under questionable circumstances in 1965. The color drained from his face. Beside me, I felt Michael step closer, finally understanding what side of history he needed to be on. The next few months transformed everything. The shop's public face remained. We still sold legitimate antiques to regular customers. But now Michael helped me manage the more complex operation below, carrying on Eleanor and Robert's legacy of returning lost treasures to their rightful owners. Barbara stopped coming by the shop. The one time she did visit, she happened to be there when we returned a medieval manuscript to a small monastery in France. The abbot's tears of joy as he reclaimed his order's lost treasure seemed to finally help her understand that some things are worth more than their sale value. Last week, I found a letter I hadn't noticed before, tucked into the back of Grandma's ledger. Emma, by now you've discovered what Rose Antiquities really is, not just a shop, but a mission. Each piece here represents a fragment of someone's heritage, a part of history that deserves to go home. Your mother understood this. She was helping us research lost artworks when she had her accident. I couldn't bear to tell you then, but I knew someday you'd be ready to know, and to continue what we started. The real treasure isn't in the monetary value of these pieces. It's in the joy of a family reclaiming their heritage, a museum completing their collection, a culture restoring its artifacts. That's the true worth of what we do. Take care of our life's work, dear one. And remember, sometimes the most valuable things are hidden in plain sight. All my love, Grandma Eleanor. The shop still stands on Main Street, looking much as it always has. Customers still browse for vintage furniture and interesting curios. But now I understand why Grandma spent so much time in her office, making international calls in the middle of the night. Why certain pieces would disappear without ever being sold. Why some visitors would leave with tears of joy after private meetings in the back room. Michael helps manage a legitimate antique business now, having left his corporate job to join me full-time. He has a good eye for it, though he still sometimes shakes his head in amazement when we unlock that basement door. Barbara tells her country club friends that her daughter-in-law does something with art recovery, making it sound as prestigious as possible without understanding the real scope of our work. That's fine. Like Grandma Eleanor, I've learned that sometimes it's better to let people believe what they want to believe. Yesterday, a young woman came into the shop clutching a faded photograph of a painting that had hung in her grandmother's house in Warsaw before the war. As I took her to my office and opened Grandma's ledger to check a familiar code, I could almost hear Eleanor's voice. The real treasure isn't always what it appears to be, dear. Sometimes you have to know where to look. Rose Antiquities continues its quiet mission, hiding history's lost treasures in plain sight until they can find their way home. And in my grandmother's old office, I'm teaching my own daughter about provenance, authenticity, and the true value of preserving the past. Some might call it just another antique shop, but we know better. After all, the most precious things often look ordinary to those who don't know where to look.
The smartphone chimed, dutifully announcing an incoming message. The red-haired woman, about to slice an avocado, glanced at the screen and read 2 short sentences from her husband. "Willa, I'll be late. Have dinner without me." With a sigh, the woman set the exotic fruit aside. Her desire to treat her husband to a dish of his beloved avocado and shrimp for dinner vanished, and her appetite disappeared with it. The investigative curiosity to test a new salad recipe for the upcoming holidays evaporated as if it had never existed. Tomorrow was already the 7th anniversary of her fateful meeting with Barry, and the end of the month would bring the new year. Willa felt a wave of sadness. Unfortunately, such messages had become routine, making her wonder if Barry had strayed and was now involved with a mistress. Why else would she, his lawful wife, have to dine alone almost every night for the past 6 months, with only the hum of the laptop for company? Trying to distract herself while waiting for her husband, Willa decided to prepare for the upcoming holiday. After all, a gloomy mood wouldn't improve on its own. She needed to try to lift her spirits. She didn't feel like doing a thorough cleaning, so she left that task for the weekend. But why not start creating a festive atmosphere right now? For instance, she could inventory the holiday decorations. Over 7 years of marriage, they had established a tradition of decorating the apartment together, but who knew when Barry would find the time? The boxes with decorations and a small but beautiful artificial tree were stored in a cabinet on the balcony. Soon after their wedding and moving into Willa's mother's apartment, Barry had set up a makeshift office and workshop there. However, Willa could count on one hand the times her husband had worked there. More often, he would sit in a comfortable chair in front of his laptop, browsing the internet or playing games. Lately, though, the improvised office, like his lawful wife, had been left alone by him more frequently. Barry would come home very late, have dinner and go straight to bed. Willa shook her head to dispel the sad thoughts, tied her hair back and began her task. She decided to leave the tree for later and focus on sorting through the ornaments. Many of them were old, dating back to her childhood, and although she had packed them carefully, some were inevitably lost or broken. She carefully lifted a plywood box adorned with red exclamation marks, a warning her father had painted to remind everyone to handle the fragile contents with care. A pang of sadness struck her. Her father had been so thoughtful, yet he had shattered their family. Willa was 15 and her younger sister Phoebe was 14 when their father announced he was leaving their mother for another woman. The news was devastating, especially since the other woman, Justina, had been a family friend. Justina and their father had been classmates and worked together at the same company. He would often give Justina rides to and from work, a convenience that eventually led to an affair. Justina's frequent visits to their home under the guise of friendship had been a ruse to conceal her true intentions. The betrayal left Willa's mother, Doris, heartbroken and embittered. She refused to hear anything about her ex-husband and his new partner, and her anger extended to all men. Doris would often stand motionless in the kitchen or another room, staring into space and silently moving her lips, as if engaged in an endless, silent conversation. She had discarded all reminders of her former husband, except for this box, which held some of the glass ornaments. Over the years their number had dwindled, but the real loss was her mother's faith in men. Willa remembered her mother's constant warnings never to trust anyone completely, not even a husband. Doris's advice had shaped Willa's own views on relationships, making her wary and guarded. As she sorted through the ornaments, she couldn't help but reflect on her own marriage and the growing distance between her and Barry. The festive preparations were a welcome distraction, but they couldn't erase the lingering doubts and sadness. And do not befriend women to avoid a treacherous stab in the back. Moreover, you should always have a secret stash that your spouse knows nothing about. Then, to Doris's great displeasure, as soon as Phoebe turned 18, she moved in with her boyfriend. The scandal was monumental. Willa even shuddered, recalling how her mother had shouted at her younger sister, predicting that she would be used and discarded. Phoebe countered that a marriage certificate was no guarantee of happiness, and that when love fades in a relationship, nothing can stop a straying husband. Doris, taken aback by her daughter's sharp retort, lost all restraint, and an ugly family quarrel ensued. Phoebe left, and contrary to her mother's grim predictions, she found happiness with her partner, although they didn't rush to formalize their union. Communication with her younger daughter almost ceased for a while, as Doris considered her a traitor. Willa spoke to her mother often, trying to soften her stance, and gradually Doris began to relent. However, the process was slow, until a greater misfortune struck, one more severe than her daughter's leaving. Upon learning of her dire diagnosis, Doris desperately sought to mend her relationship with Phoebe. Naturally, the primary burden fell on Willa, but her younger sister also supported their mother as best she could, passing on and transferring large sums to her elder sister. Doris, despite her pain, tried to stay strong, and on one of the rare days when she felt well enough, she packed everything that reminded her of her unfaithful husband into bags and asked Willa to throw them into the dumpsters. The only thing she spared was a box of toys, a remnant of a happier past. In their conversations, the sisters agreed that the stresses Doris had endured played a significant role in her illness. 10 years ago, the disease had retreated under the pressure of treatment and her daughter's support. However, by the time Willa was preparing to meet Barry, the illness had returned. Weakened, Doris tried to dissuade her from this step. Her main objection to Barry was his appearance. "Oh, my dear, why this dandy? A handsome husband is always a risk of being left alone with children, and that's not even the worst outcome. It would be far sadder to end up with a broken heart. But don't rush into having children. Take your time and observe Barry more closely. He's too flashy. Women will be lining up to steal him away." This time Phoebe agreed with their mother and advised, "Willa, make sure that in case of a divorce, this fancy man gets nothing. I, for one, live with my partner without a marriage certificate for practical reasons." When Doris realized that Willa was determined to marry Barry, she did not argue or cause a scene. Firstly, she lacked the strength due to her illness. Secondly, she feared a repeat of the estrangement she had experienced with her younger daughter. Rationally, Doris understood there might not be time for reconciliation, so she soon asked Willa, "Forgive me, dear, for my grumbling. You understand, once bitten, twice shy. Marry your Barry and be happy. I just have one request. Live with me here, in this apartment. I don't have much time left." Willa tried to persuade her mother otherwise, but despite nodding in response to her daughter's arguments, a deep sadness lingered in Doris's eyes. Despite all efforts, Doris could not overcome the recurrence of her illness. After a year and a half of struggle, she passed away. Throughout this difficult period, Barry showed no sign of dissatisfaction with his wife, who was constantly by her ailing mother's side. Unlike Robert, Phoebe's partner, who never once visited Doris, Willa's husband was always ready to help. He assisted in taking Doris to her treatments and proved to be a true support for his wife and sister-in-law. When the battle with the illness was lost, it was Barry who handled all the formalities and arranged Doris's funeral. Robert also proved useful. The athletic man tactfully but firmly removed Doris's ex-husband and Justina, who had somehow learned of Doris's passing from the memorial service. However, another strange incident occurred that sad day. Immediately after the wake, Willa's mother-in-law, settling on the couch in her daughter-in-law's apartment, began talking about planning for a child now that the inheritance process was underway. The second room is now free, and there are no more obstacles to having a baby, although it would be even better to sell this apartment and find a place in a better neighbourhood. Shocked, Willa remained silent, though she was not usually timid. She felt a strong urge to send her rude mother-in-law away, but Barry, sensing her mood, changed the subject. However, Mrs. Kearns did not relinquish her ideas and frequently commented on the unfortunate neighbourhood where her daughter-in-law's apartment was located. Willa confided in her sister, and Phoebe offered sage advice. Selling this apartment and buying a new one is unwise, especially since your mother-in-law's arguments are weak. This is a decent neighbourhood. There's a park nearby, and the transportation is excellent. Moreover, there's a kindergarten and school close by. But that's not the most important thing. New housing would be jointly owned property, and in the divorce, you would have to divide it. Why are you talking about such sad things, Phoebe? Barry gives me no reason to think about divorce. It's great, but don't forget about your own interests. Take my Robert, for example. Once confessed that his father made him swear never to formalise the marriage, so their family wouldn't lose money and property. Willa was shocked by her sister's revelations and asked, "How could you continue to live with Robert and communicate with his relatives after such a confession?" "Oh, I wanted to be offended and leave him proudly, but then, after thinking and consulting legal forums, I realised that I love him so much that I can tolerate his father's foolish vow. Robert understands that it hurts me to be in the role of a cohabitant and tries to compensate. Gifts don't have to be returned in case of breakup, so he formalised a gift agreement for a car and constantly buys me jewellery. Returning to your scheming mother-in-law, blame everything on me. I won't give up what's mine. I have a legitimate half-share here, and I won't sell it below market value. That way, you can more easily deal with your mother-in-law and you won't be involved. I can handle her disapproving looks a couple of times a year." Reflecting on unhappy memories, Willa carefully examined the fragile Christmas decorations and was glad she hadn't lost any more. She convinced herself that this was a good sign that all was well in her family. But reason protested. In the past, Willa hadn't believed her mother's sad predictions about men's infidelity or her sister's warnings. But what should she do now? There were more signs that Barry had found love elsewhere. Were her mother and Phoebe right in predicting a sad end to her seemingly eternal love story? Would she have to endure the bitterness of betrayal? Had Barry also been seduced by romantic affairs on the side? What had she and countless other women done wrong? Had they been too caring or not warm enough? Pondering this complex and painful topic, Willa set the box aside and began to unpack a large garland. She accidentally knocked over another box, which fell and opened. Among the scattered ornaments, she noticed a gift bag with something inside. After a moment's hesitation, Willa decided to satisfy her curiosity. She opened the package and found a small postcard inscribed, "To my beloved," and a box containing a costly smartphone. Willa felt warmth and lightness in her heart. Her suspicions of her husband's infidelity were unfounded. Barry had noticed the problems with her old smartphone and decided to give her a useful gift. Perhaps not for New Year's, but earlier, maybe for the anniversary of their first meeting. Willa carefully returned the gift bag and box with tree ornaments to their places, so her husband wouldn't suspect she had discovered her surprise. She hurried to the kitchen, determined not to let Barry know she had found out about his gift. But she could still pamper him as planned. Anticipating the joy, she reflected that things are not always as they seem at first glance. Perhaps Barry's budget had been strained by the purchase of the expensive smartphone, forcing him to work overtime. That would explain his late arrivals home. She had imagined the worst, but now she understood the truth. Inspired by the prospect of trying a new recipe, the woman imagined her husband's joy and anticipated a pleasant family dinner. Barry returned home close to midnight and, after spending about 15 minutes in the bathroom, finally appeared in the kitchen. She served him a beautifully arranged salad and put the mashed potatoes and cutlet in the microwave to warm. However, Barry's reaction to the meal caught her completely off guard. After quickly eating almost half of his dinner, he looked at her and began to complain. "Could you have made a more economical meal?" "What? Isn't it tasty?" Willa asked with a surprise, preoccupied with the thought that she needed to play the surprised face when she received the smartphone. "It's delicious, but shrimp and avocado are expensive, especially for an ordinary dinner, not a special occasion. I think you've been spending too much on food lately." He continued eating, but soon resumed his complaints, as Willa placed a box of large pastries on the table. "You definitely should bake at home, it's cheaper. I have a rough idea of how much all this costs. For the price of these 4 tiny pastries, you could probably bake a kilogram of decent cookies." "What do you think, that you married a money bag?" "These are bourgeois habits, buying pastries from bakeries where they add all sorts of genetically modified products. We're practically flushing all our earnings down the toilet now, and in the future we'll be supporting pharmaceutical companies because of your laziness and extravagance." Willa didn't take his grumbling seriously and even admired how skillfully he feigned sternness. Remembering the gift she had found, she was pleasantly anticipating exploring and setting up her new smartphone, and decided to play along with Barry's act. With a touch of exaggeration, Willa exclaimed, "You're so thrifty. With you, we have nothing to fear from financial crises." Willa wondered when Barry would give her the gift, but hoped he would save the anniversary celebration for the following evening. The fishing tools she had prepared for him now seemed insignificant, and she wanted to compliment them with a special dinner. As she pondered what to do to treat her husband properly, Barry reached the peak of his complaints and demanded, "You know what, Willa? From now on, start collecting receipts for all your purchases, and then say once a week we'll sit down together and analyse what you bought impulsively and what we could have done without. With your approach, we'll be stuck in this tiny apartment forever. If you didn't spend so much on food, we could have improved our living conditions by now." Willa grimaced. Over the past year and a half, the topic of buying a new apartment had come up almost daily, and although she knew the initiative came from her mother-in-law rather than her husband, her irritation grew. However, she didn't want to argue on the eve of their special evening, so she simply cleared the dirty dishes from the table and, kissing her husband, murmured, "In a few minutes it will be the anniversary of our first meeting, and now I'm going to bed, hoping you'll join me soon." Barry seemed taken aback by her response and replied hesitantly, Yes, you go ahead. I'll finish my tea. The pastry is too good to resist." Willa, wearing a beautiful nightgown, hoped her husband would join her in the bedroom soon, but she fell asleep waiting. In the morning, seeing the dirty coffee cup and plate with crumbs on the kitchen table, she realised Barry had already left for work. The unpleasant conversation about excessive spending now seemed trivial, and at work, anticipating a pleasant evening, Willa tried not to daydream, but struggled to focus. Fortunately, there wasn't much work at the atelier, and she meticulously planned their celebration for two. She smiled, recalling how sternly Barry had scolded her for spending too much on food, and decided to treat him again. She wanted to reward him for the generous gift he was about to give her. For Willa, the value of the smartphone, or its prestige, was less important than the sentiment behind her husband's gift. For romantic dinner, she decided not to overthink too much and buy trout steaks to bake with vegetables. Eagerly awaiting her lunch break, she hurried to the central market, despite the high prices, because the selection was better than at the nearest supermarket. Fortunately, the market was only 5 stops away from work, easily manageable during her lunch break. As she returned to the atelier with her purchases, the bus she was riding suddenly broke down midway. Assessing the number of passengers at the nearby stops and the time left in her lunch break, Willa decided not to wait for public transport and called a taxi. However, as if by Murphy's Law, her smartphone suddenly froze. Encouraging herself with the thought that she would have a new reliable device that very evening, she rushed back to work on foot. Taking a shortcut through the central street, she suddenly noticed her husband's silhouette in the large window of a prestigious bakery, tucked away in a quiet, cosy spot. Willa was about to dash inside to say hello, but froze in her tracks. Barry was enjoying pastries with a blonde woman with a stylish haircut. On the table in front of the stranger lay a gift bag that Willa had seen just the day before. Perhaps it could have been a coincidence, but the blonde was also holding a brand new smartphone and saying something admiringly to Barry. "Why are you standing in the middle of the street like a statue?" A disgruntled male voice interrupted her thoughts. Someone chuckled behind her. "Frozen, are you, snow maiden?" A rough hand nudged Willa, but she paid no attention and continued watching her husband and the blonde woman. They were engaged in a lively conversation. The stranger was showing something to Barry on her device's screen and laughing at his words. Willa didn't know what to do. She feared that entering the cafe would make her look foolish or lead to an irreparable scene. However, standing outside, waiting for her husband to finish his rendezvous, was almost unbearable. Suddenly, Willa's smartphone, which had been silent, buzzed loudly, jolting her from her thoughts. Her boss's displeased voice came through. "Are you planning to return to work at all? Your client is already waiting." Willa glanced at the screen. She still had 10 minutes left of her lunch break. But her strict boss seemed unconcerned with such details and loudly ordered, "Get back to work! The sooner you return, the better." Then, lowering her voice, presumably so the client wouldn't hear, she added more kindly, "Willa, she is principal where my little rascal studies. You know I always reciprocate." The distressed Willa even managed to smile. Yes, her boss could be overly stern, especially with clients, but she genuinely supported her employees. Besides, continuing to stand outside, watching Barry's peaceful conversation with some blonde was pointless and even dangerous. Her nerves might not hold, leading to unpredictable consequences. So Willa replied without argument, "All right, I'll be there in 5 minutes." She cast one last glance at her husband in the cafe and hurried back to work. Despite life's dramas, Willa strove to remain professional. Her beloved work was one of the anchors, keeping her relatively stable and preventing her from spiralling into despair. As she discussed order details with a client, she tried to push thoughts of Barry's strange meeting with the unknown woman out of her mind. But it was nearly impossible. She noted the client's preferences, changed the initial specification, and then heard an unpleasant, shrill voice. "Hey, are you even listening to me? What are you scribbling there? Sleeves with ruffles, not a neckline. This is outrageous. Stop daydreaming and write everything down as I say, not whatever you feel like." Then the client wrinkled her nose disdainfully and complained, "Ugh, and why does it smell like fish here? This is supposed to be an atelier, not a market." Only then did Willa remember the groceries she had carelessly left on the floor and, apologizing, picked them up and hurried to put them in the small fridge. When she returned, her boss was already soothing the disgruntled client. After all the client's wishes were recorded and she left, her boss turned to Willa. "I think you should go home today. Your mind is elsewhere. I hope you'll be more focused tomorrow, as our busy season is starting." Thanking her boss, Willa got home. Yes, she wasn't rushing to get there. It seemed easier to analyse everything she had seen without excess emotion in the cool air outside. A call from her sister came just as Willa was about to head to Barry's workplace to demand an explanation about his conversation with the blonde. Phoebe began congratulating her on the anniversary of meeting her husband and wishing her all the best. Suddenly, she paused. "Willa, why are you so quiet? Are you busy and only half listening to me?" Willa didn't hide her feelings. She told Phoebe about her suspicions of Barry's infidelity and her desire to confront him at his office. After a few seconds, her younger sister reasoned. "Honestly, I wouldn't act rashly if I were you. As you said, Barry was talking animatedly with that stranger, and she was fiddling with her smartphone. It seems to me that the situation is quite innocent. Not defending Barry, but for the sake of fairness, he might have asked that blonde for help setting up the smartphone he bought for you. A perfectly reasonable explanation, I think." "Oh, and setting up a smartphone can only be done in a cafe," Wilma remarked bitterly. "I understand your sarcasm, but maybe it was just a business meeting. The package might be similar, and the phone belongs to that blonde. I don't think it's worth tormenting yourself with suspicions and doubts. In any case, everything will become clear this evening. Dinner will set things straight. If I were you, I'd calmly head home, taking advantage of the spare time your considerate boss has given you. Take a bubble bath, do a face and hair mask, and all that. Anyway, taking care of yourself is never a bad idea." "Maybe you're right," Willa replied. "I'll do just that." After saying goodbye to her sister, she walked home more confidently. While the bath was filling, she marinated some fish steaks and put a bottle of sparkling wine, a gift from a satisfied client, in the fridge. Curiosity led her to check Barry's hiding spot. However, this only intensified her suspicions. The gift bag with its content was missing. Of course, there could be an entirely innocent and reasonable explanation for its disappearance, but Willa's festive mood vanished completely. Even a bath with her favourite products didn't help improve her mood. But as she cooked, Willa gradually relaxed. After all, everything would soon become clear. The aromas wafting through the kitchen were intoxicating, and the act of creation gave her a sense of control over her own life. Barry arrived home quite early, and handing Willa a single red rose and a cosmetic set of shampoo and conditioner, clearly bought from the nearest chain store, washed his hands and sat down at the table. The woman barely suppressed a cry of disappointment at not receiving the smartphone. Still, she hoped it would turn out that he was just teasing her. However, he managed to surprise her again, and unpleasantly so. Seeing the trout and a bottle of Italian sparkling wine on the table, he raised an eyebrow in disapproval and, instead of congratulations, seriously asked, "Didn't we just talk about living more frugally? What is this extravagance? The trout is clearly not cheap, and the wine is obviously not from the lower price range. Where are the receipts, Willa? Let's write down your expenses right now so you don't forget anything. You're acting like a rich woman, and I always end up paying for everything." Willa was shocked, but did not remain silent, and retorted, "Remember, I earn money too, and quite well. I pay the utilities myself and don't ask you for money for cosmetics or other personal needs. Remind me, what do you pay for, Barry?" The man, pausing from his fish steak, calmly replied, "Who replaced the kitchen faucet? Dickens?" "Well, really," Willa laughed, though she didn't find it funny. "I must have reminded you about that faucet for half a year, if not more." "Well, you know I've been very busy." Barry tried to justify himself, sensing that his wife was genuinely angry, and attempted to placate her. "Thank you. Everything turned out delicious. All right, for the sake of the celebration, we can postpone keeping track of expenses. I admit now is not the time. Besides, I promised to help Mum, so I need to go." "But why today? Doesn't her mum know that today is our special day?" "She has some problems and I promised to stop by. I need to help her. You understand, Mum is sacred. As a good son, I must support her. I'll just put a couple of pieces of fish in a container and go pamper Mum." Willa was so taken aback that she even forgot to give her husband his gift. The package with the fishing lures remained in the drawer, with various kitchen odds and ends. Barry, transferring the remaining steaks from the pan to the container, grabbed the bottle of sparkling wine from the table, put everything in Willa's favourite shopper, which she had sewn herself, and headed for the hallway. The woman noted with growing displeasure that her husband didn't even feel like kissing her. From the door, Barry shouted back towards the kitchen. "Don't wait up for me. I probably won't be back soon. I'll have to stay at Mum's and go straight to work from there in the morning." "Of course, it will take time to treat your real beloved properly," Willa whispered, annoyed by her husband's hurried lies. The end of her family life seemed to be on the horizon. The evening had put everything in its place. So, she was not his beloved after all. It was not for her that he had prepared the expensive smartphone she had seen in the hands of a stranger that day. The most hurtful thing was not that Barry had betrayed the family, but that he had lied so skillfully and pretended so convincingly. Of course, she couldn't believe that Barry had gone to his mother's. There was no evidence to support this innocent version of his escape on their anniversary. On the contrary, everything pointed to him finding another woman, to whom he had gone with the carefully prepared treats from his wife. The blonde would surely thank him for the smartphone and then refresh herself with seafood and sparkling wine. Hearing the sound of the closing door and the elevator taking her husband away to his adventures, Willa called Phoebe and briefly explained the situation. "In short, divorce is creeping up on me and I had no idea. The situation is clear. Barry, under the pretext of visiting his mother, has rushed off to his mistress. I'm more than sure of it. You know, it's even funny now. He lectured me so thoroughly, even sternly, about being wasteful, but he didn't forget to take the non-cheap steaks and sparkling wine he had scolded me for. The smartphone, which I thought was an anniversary gift, had apparently already been given to the other woman, and I got a not-so-fresh flower, anti-dandruff shampoo, which I don't need, and conditioner. Well, Willa, I don't even know what to say. Of course, you could call Mrs. Kearns or even visit her to get to the bottom of this," her sister said, uncertain. "But why, Phoebe? To hear more lies? I'm sure my mother-in-law will cover for her son and come up with some story. Nope, I don't want to see or hear her trying to squirm out of this." Phoebe objected. "Well, from what I know of your mother-in-law, she won't bother to make excuses. She'll probably go on the offensive, and you'll have to explain why her wonderful Barry slipped away from you on your anniversary." Willa smirked. Exactly, just like her son. "Accused me of being wasteful while entertaining himself on the side and throwing money around. It's unbelievable. He's demanding receipts from me, yet someone else is receiving a gift worth nearly a half of his salary or more." Although Willa's hope for a long and happy family life with Barry was shattered, she felt neither pain nor shock, and was even surprised when her sister offered to come over. "Why, Phoebe? There's no need. Believe me, I won't cry or do anything worse. There's no point in trying to keep Barry. We don't have children, and as we both know, children can't keep a man. Let him enjoy his blonde. And good luck to her in dealing with Mrs. Kearns. Oh, darling, good for you for reacting this way. But if you start feeling down or lonely, call me, and I'll be over. Thank you, Phoebe. I need some time alone. Besides, I won't be bored. I need to pack Barry's things and change the lock. I want him to understand that I won't forgive his betrayal. The sisters said their goodbyes, and Willa began packing her husband's belongings. She hadn't expected their anniversary evening to end with her clearing out his side of the closet. Methodically and calmly, filling Barry's gym bag and then large bags with his things, Willa regretted not taking the sparkling wine from the cheating jerk. A couple of sips would have made the process more enjoyable. The humiliating gift of cosmetics also went into one of the bags, along with shaving foam, a toothbrush, a razor, and Barry's personal towel. The rose, still lying on the kitchen table, was tossed into the trash. Willa dragged the filled bags to the door and suddenly remembered her plan to change the lock. In an hour later, a smiling thin man of indeterminate age quickly completed that job, accepted a few bills from Willa, and even offered to give her change, but she stopped him. This is for your promptness and kindness. The man beamed and, deftly pocketing the bill, nodded towards the filled bags and offered, "If you need, I can take out the trash." Willa thanked the helpful man, but declined, although for a moment she was tempted to throw out Barry's things in revenge. Throughout the next workday, she tried not to think about her husband, and her boss didn't ask unnecessary questions. During her lunch break, her sister called and offered to come over for moral support and to keep Barry in check if needed. Who knows what he might do out of spite, but Robert and I will keep him from doing anything stupid, and will support you too. But Willa declined. "I'll manage. Thanks for your concern, Phoebe." "All right, but if you need anything, call right away, and let me know when it's all over. I mean, when this jerk leaves." Willa promised to keep her sister updated, ending the call, immersed herself in work. She even skipped lunch to avoid staying late. She got home first and, sitting in the kitchen, heard the key turn in the lock. Barry couldn't open the door, of course. Without wasting time, he called Willa on the phone. The woman skipped and opened the door ajar, leaving it closed with a chain. "Hello, what's going on, Willa? I'm hungry, tired, dreaming of taking a bath and relaxing, and you're setting up some kind of quest for me. Are you hiding a lover or something?" The man chuckled and ordered, "All right, enough joking around. Let me in already, and heat up the dinner." Barry indeed looked tired, and Willa found it so amusing that she ironically pitied him. "Oh, poor thing, you spent so much money on a phone for your mistress, and she didn't even feed you. How ungrateful she is." Through the small gap, Willa noticed a momentary embarrassment flash across Barry's face, but he quickly regained his composure. "I don't know what you're talking about. Is this really the time for jokes? Please open the door. I'm genuinely hungry and tired." "Wait, Barry. First, you'll listen to me calmly. I've packed all your things, and I'm asking you to take them quietly and without a scandal. I'm even willing to wait while you call a taxi to take everything away at once." "Have you lost your mind? Willa, this isn't funny. Open the door, I said. I don't know why you're angry, but I assure you you're mistaken. I'm completely innocent." "Barry, stop playing the innocent. You know, I wouldn't even be offended if you gave me a random set for our anniversary. Maybe you remembered it too late, or maybe you were embarrassed to return empty-handed, or maybe you couldn't think of anything suitable and decided to give a practical gift. But I know that yesterday, during your lunch break, you gave a costly smartphone to your mistress, and on the day of our anniversary, no less. I won't even mention that you ran off in the evening with the dishes I prepared. After such pettiness and shameless betrayal, I can't even stand to talk to you. So, either I open the door now and you calmly take everything, or I'll start throwing your things out through this gap one by one. Or, as an option, I'll toss them off the balcony. Choose which option you prefer. You're getting worked up, Willa. Let me in and we'll talk calmly. There's nothing to talk about. You'll take your stuff and goodbye, as they say. The question is, how will you collect them? Will you pick them up from under the balcony, gather them one by one from the floor, or take them away quietly, peacefully and neatly in bags? The man understood from Willa's tone that he couldn't change her mind at that moment, and meekly muttered, I'll take everything in bags, open up. Willa let in her husband, whom she had already decided to relegate to the status of X, and nodded toward his belongings lined up along the corridor walls, now in a neat row, but in several layers. Call a taxi, you can't carry all that in your hands. Looking Willa in the eye, Barry pleaded, Come on, let's talk. You're kicking me out into nowhere. That's not my problem, Barry. I can't think of a single reason why I should put up with you here. I repeat, take your things and go wherever you want. I don't want to go anywhere. I'm fine right here. With a smug smile, Barry reached out to hug his wife, but she stretched out her arms in a warning gesture and advised, You'd better call a taxi, or I'll call the police. Actually, I'm your husband, and I have the right to live here, Barry brazenly declared, determined to stay in his wife's apartment at any cost and to persuade her to make up. He added, And besides, I love you, among other things. However, the confession sounded completely unconvincing, and Willa advised, For the last time, I'm asking you nicely, get out. Don't test my patience. Go to the one you gave the smartphone to. She's the one you love, while your faithful wife should be happy with a cheap shower set. Great plan. Why are you so fixated on that smartphone? Why do you think I don't have the right to give gifts? I earn my own money. I give my own gifts whoever I want. Barry, enough! You ask me for receipts for grocery purchase, but it turns out you have the right to dispose of your income as you see fit. Very original, but unfair. Willa began kicking the nearest bag towards the exit with her foot, and Barry, blushing with anger, began dragging the bags out onto the landing one by one, simultaneously typing something on his smartphone. Watching the end of her love story, Willa didn't feel bitterness yet, and involuntarily compared herself to her mother. Her mother had it much worse, with daughters to care for and the pain of betrayal by a friend and husband. So it was easier for her to keep her composure and not show Barry how hurtful it was to waste 7 years. After finishing moving his things into the elevator, the man, without saying a word of farewell, squeezed into the cabin and went downstairs. After calling his sister to report on how the breakup went, Willa headed to the kitchen. She drank tea without tasting it and watched some comedy show on her laptop without understanding the jokes. Willa felt empty inside, with no thoughts in her head. An hour after Barry left, her mother-in-law called her and began to complain. "What have you come up with? Why did you kick Barry out? For being a good son and helping me?" "No, Mrs. Kearns, I kicked Barry out for being a bad husband." "Willa, you're wrong. If a man helps his mother, there's no reason to throw him out like a misbehaving cat. I don't know what you've imagined, but yesterday Barry came to my place in the evening because I needed to replace the water filter, which required disassembling half the kitchen cabinet. It was very inconvenient and very time-consuming. Then I fed my son. He lay down to rest after dinner and slept until morning. So it's my fault that Barry didn't return to you yesterday, and you overreacted and kicked him out. Isn't that unfair?" Until Mrs. Kearns started defending her son so persistently, Willa hadn't considered catching her in a lie. But, growing angry, she asked her mother-in-law a provocative question. "By the way, did Barry bring you the fruit drink and dumplings with the new recipe yesterday? How did you like them?" Mrs. Kearns, unsuspecting of the trap, began praising her daughter-in-law's culinary skills. "Delicious, Wilma. Everything was just right. The seasoning, the salt. The fruit drink was also wonderful. Will you share the recipe sometime, if it's not some big secret?" After her mother-in-law's slip, Willa was convinced that Barry hadn't visited his mother with the fish steaks and sparkling wine the night before, and Mrs. Kearns was clumsily covering for her son. Barry's muffled whisper could be heard from the speaker. The man had apparently overheard part of the conversation and realized that his mother had slipped up, implicating him as well. Her mother-in-law began to make awkward excuses. "Oh, well, I must have misheard you and got everything mixed up. Barry did bring the fish." As if sharing its owner's indignation, Willa's smartphone screen flickered, went dark, and then the device began to reboot. The woman sighed. "Now my without 5 minutes ex-mother-in-law will think I hung up on her on purpose or out of spite." However, Willa didn't call back or apologize. Let her son talk to his mother. She had no time for this waste. She needed to fill the shelves emptied of Barry's things, so they wouldn't bother her with their gaping void. The phone finished rebooting, and almost immediately Barry called. Mrs. Kearns was apparently not nearby, and the man's voice was loud and irritated. "Well, are you happy now? You caught my mother in a lie?" "Barry, don't blame me for your inability to lie convincingly." "Don't blame me for not coordinating your story with your mother that could plausibly cover your escapades. That's not my fault at all." "It's still unfair to set traps for my mother," Barry protested. But Willa quickly retorted. "Says the man who gave a smartphone to another woman on the anniversary of our meeting. Receiving a set of cheap cosmetics on this special day, knowing another woman is happily exploring a smartphone. That's what I call unfair. Anyway, I don't want to talk or even think about this situation. Please, for the sake of all the good times we had, let's not ruin our past with arguments and mutual recriminations." Barry seemed taken aback by Willa's meek request, perhaps expecting more accusations. "Fine. No use arguing now. By the way, I want to take the table on the balcony and the sofa." "No problem, Barry. Just let me know when you're coming to pick them up." Mumbling something incomprehensible, Barry ended the call. Only after this conversation did Willa feel sad. The man she had considered her rock, who had proven reliable in difficult times, had turned out to be like many others. However, she didn't have an opportunity to dwell on her husband's treachery or the deceitfulness of men in general, as the doorbell rang. Her younger sister had rushed to her aid. Behind Phoebe stood Robert, who clearly felt improper. "Come in," Willa welcomed them, although she wasn't sure she wanted company, even from close relatives. Phoebe ordered her companion, "Robert, take the bags to the kitchen and then you can go. If possible, pick me up tomorrow morning to take me to work." "Got it," Robert jokingly saluted. Quickly completing Phoebe's task, he left the apartment. "Don't worry, Willa. Luck will smile on us," Phoebe said, hugging her older sister. "I'm not worried, just disappointed. I get it. I don't know what's easier to bear, a husband's betrayal or a loved one who's in no hurry to marry. It's disappointing. What are men looking for? Do they always seek something or someone better for themselves?" The question hung in the air, because the answer was no easier to find than understanding what women want. About 2 weeks had passed since Willa kicked Barry out. He hadn't shown up or even called to take the table and the sofa. Then one day, Mrs. Kearns entered the atelier. She politely greeted everyone, and seeing that Willa was not busy with clients, almost rushed to hug her and asked, "Let's go outside and talk calmly." Willa's boss nodded to her, allowing her to leave her workstation. Once outside, both women stood in silence, watching the large snowflakes swirl around them. Mrs. Kearns clearly struggled to find the right words to start the conversation, so she began from afar. "Busy at work?" she asked. "Yes, it's the busiest time of the year. Everyone wants to look their best for the holidays, and many are preparing for corporate events." The mother-in-law expressed her concern. "Oh, Willa, you're not taking care of yourself. You need to rest too." Willa couldn't think of a response and waited for the woman to get to the point. "Willa, please forgive my foolish Barry. You must understand that any man can make a mistake, even the most faithful. Barry is staying with me now and he looks terrible. He's made a mess of things and regrets it deeply." Willa replied, "I understand your desire to reconcile us, but our family is broken. I don't know what version of events he told you, but believe me, I had a perfect reason to leave him." The mother-in-law smiled gently. "Willa, in a marriage you need to be flexible and navigate around sharp corners. It's important to preserve love. It's always easier to break something than to build it. Barry is not a bad man." "If he were, I wouldn't have married him," Wilma interrupted her, "and I wouldn't have trusted him blindly for 6 years. "But look," the mother-in-law continued, shifting to a moral offensive, "look at the surrounding beauty. Even our gloomy city is transformed. In the evening, the illuminations will be turned on and everything will become magical. The holidays are approaching. New Year, Christmas. Why refuse to do a good deed and forgive Barry?" "Am I supposed to be Santa Claus, granting wishes?" Willa exclaimed in indignation. "This is not my problem that Barry didn't think about the consequences of his betrayal. I'm hurting too." "But Willa, think about Barry. You've lived together for so many years. Doesn't it bother you that he's spending most of his time on the couch, drinking litres of beer every evening? Talk to him like a close friend, help him relax and feel human again." "You know what? I'm tired of convincing you that my relationship with Barry is over. Let that blonde he gave the expensive smartphone to take care of him and drink tea with him." At these words, Mrs. Kearns snapped. "Oh, that blonde bimbo is a selfish, arrogant and rude gold digger. She thinks the world revolves around her and sees Barry as nothing more than an ATM. She's lazy, has no decent education, and occasionally works as a promoter, dreaming of becoming an actress at 24, as if the film industry is waiting for her. She's not even from here and rents an apartment with a friend." Listening to the list of the other woman's flaws, Willa realised that Mrs. Kearns' true motive for wanting reconciliation was not just concern for her son, but also the discomfort of sharing her apartment with him and the prospect of a new daughter-in-law. "Oh, now I understand you and your motives better. You just want to get rid of Barry because your apartment is too crowded, and you don't want that woman as your daughter-in-law. You want to shoulder him on me again." "Why so harsh? I just want to save my son from that predator, and you must help me." Willa was saved from having to listen to more demands disguised as wishes by her boss, who poked her head out of the atelier door and said, "Excuse me, but we're still open. A client will be arriving soon." Mrs. Kearns wanted to say more, but left, biting her lip. The beautiful winter cityscape no longer brought her joy. Her daughter-in-law, whom she had thought naive and simple, had shown unexpected strength of character. Even her principled stance seemed trivial compared to the brazen audacity of her son's new girlfriend. A few days before New Year, Barry visited Wilma to collect his remaining belongings after calling ahead. He handed her a small package without looking her in the eye and said, "Here, to replace your old smartphone. It's not a flagship model, but it's good and reliable." "Thank you, Barry, but I have already bought myself a very nice smartphone. And if you think this phone will make me forgive you and change my mind about the divorce, you are terribly wrong. Wake up, dear. I am not going to forgive infidelity. Good luck." Barry took his things and left Wilma's apartment for good. Their divorce was finalised without issues, and whenever they encountered each other in the city, Willa felt neither resentment nor sadness. She believed her happiness was still ahead. And it came true. At her sister's wedding with her long-time partner Robert, Willa met a man and married him. Simon opened his eyes and stretched, a habitual morning ritual. He had made it a rule to wake up early several years ago, turning it into a mandatory part of his daily routine. His life was governed by a set of unchanging rules. First, there was the obligatory morning exercise, not particularly strenuous or lengthy, but better than nothing. Second, a contrast shower. Although he hadn't yet mustered the courage to switch instantly from scalding hot to icy cold water, he tried his best and always felt invigorated afterward. Third, he made sure to have breakfast in a calm, unhurried manner, avoiding the rush of eating on the go. The meal had to consist of proper dishes and ingredients. After all, we are what we eat. This saying had struck a chord with Simon. He didn't want to resemble a poorly cooked omelette or burnt porridge. So he took his breakfast preparation seriously, especially now that he had to do it himself. After breakfast, he would return to the bathroom to wash up, shave meticulously, and brush his teeth thoroughly. He took pride in his appearance, even though he wouldn't admit it to anyone. While some might say that men don't care about their looks, Simon believed that those who had nothing worth looking at could afford such indifference. He, on the other hand, was blessed with good looks and intended to maintain them for as long as possible. Women, after all, spent a considerable amount of time enhancing their appearance, and no one considered it a waste of time. Yet if a man lingered in front of the mirror, he was often ridiculed and accused of lacking masculinity. Indeed, even Kelly, as he recalled, had been patient with his habit of lingering in the bathroom, even if she did giggle about it. And truthfully, he had never had any issues with breakfast back then, and truth be told, he had never tasted better pancakes than those she made. Catching himself reminiscing about her, he frowned in annoyance. He had promised himself to forget her after yesterday's events, but here he was, thinking about her again. Determined, Simon got up and began his morning routine, trying to convince himself that this day was no different from any other. For a while he succeeded, but soon he found himself irritably tossing a pan of overcooked eggs into the sink and sitting down on a stool. What was the point of pretending everything was fine? Nothing was fine. The forgotten exercise, the 2 nicks on his chin from shaving, the burnt omelette, and the sudden urge to smoke. All these were signs that something was amiss. He hadn't experienced any of this in a long time. Clearly his state of mind was far from normal. Had yesterday's events affected him so deeply? He listened to his inner self and gave a definitive answer. Yes. It had not only affected him, but also shocked, outraged and confused him, even frightening him a little. Yesterday had completely thrown him off balance. What made it even more surprising was that he hadn't anticipated such an outcome. When he called and arranged to meet her, he expected a different reaction. He thought Kelly might not be overjoyed, but at least she would respond reasonably. They would sit down, have a calm conversation, discuss everything, and make a sensible decision together. It hadn't been easy for him to take this step, to visit his ex-wife after 3 years of separation, and to say what he had said. He was even prepared to take some of the blame for their breakup and admit that he hadn't been entirely right. Yes, he was ready for a lot, and expected at least some understanding in return. But what did he get? Mockery and blatant, unmasked, cynical indifference. He was like a fool with a huge bouquet of roses that he had so carefully chosen in the store, trying not to think about the outrageous price, and desperately trying to remember what kind of flowers Kelly liked. Truth be told, he had never been good with flowers, neither choosing them, giving them, nor even holding them. What's so surprising? How many normal men feel comfortable alone with a bouquet? She knew this well, watching his discomfort in the hallway, yet still she teased him. "Oh, Simon, are these for me? Or do you have another date after me? Too bad if they're not for me. They're stunning." He should have kept quiet instead of blurting out, "Yes, these are for you, your favourite red roses." And she, the tease, batted her eyelashes and replied, "Well, thank you, especially since I've always preferred white chrysanthemums." Honestly, even when they lived together, he didn't shower her with bouquets. He gave them to her on special occasions like birthdays or Mother's Day. But this time it was from the heart, so to speak, and she, how could she? She should be more serious, more responsible. They're not kids anymore. This fact bothered Simon, as if reaching 45 marked the end of his youth. 45 years had passed so quickly. Half his life, if he's optimistic about his future. Doesn't Kelly understand this? She's only 3 years younger than him. She's not a young girl anymore, to put it mildly. Although objectively she looks good. No, she looks great. Very great. Why lie to himself? Kelly looks stunning. Honestly, yesterday he was at a loss for words and just stood there, staring at her. When he was getting ready to meet her, he imagined his ex-wife, whom he hadn't seen in over 2 years, as having gained weight, like many women in their 40s. He thought she would have given up on her appearance, especially since Kelly never cared much for fashion or clothes. He expected her to be in some baggy tracksuit, her hair tied back with an elastic band. Maybe she'd make a bit of an effort since he was coming over. She could impress him, at least out of pride. But no matter how hard Kelly would try, she couldn't turn back time. And then the door opened, and there she was, a stunning brunette, with dark hair cascading to her shoulders in stylish waves. She looked at him with sparkling brown eyes and smiled. He was taken aback, feeling a flush of heat at the sight of her smile. She had always been slim, as long as he could remember, and she moved with an energy that never seemed to fade. Even after having 3 children, her figure remained unchanged. Everyone said she became more beautiful with each pregnancy. He never paid much attention to such comments. People say that to all women to be supportive. The worse a woman looks, the more compliments she gets, right? In any case, he never saw any particular beauty in his wife. Women rarely become more attractive with age, and Kelly always had an ordinary, unremarkable appearance, lacking brightness and originality. She never liked or knew how to use makeup, and had rather old-fashioned views on beauty. Even when they had money, and she could afford to improve her appearance, she refused to go to a plastic surgeon. She refused even to dye her hair, insisting she loved her natural dark hair colour. What's so great about that? She spent her life with plain black hair, like a raven. She lacked style, elegance and refinement, even after moving from the countryside 20 years ago. Over the years, he got used to her and stopped noticing it. Surprisingly, he couldn't even remember the length of her hair when they separated. Oh, where did her wrinkles go? He thought, looking at his stunning ex-wife. He remembered them well when they divorced. 3 distinct vertical wrinkles on her forehead between her eyebrows. She always joked rather foolishly that they were for each of her children, as if each had left a memento in the form of a wrinkle. It was a strange way to choke, instead of getting them smoothed out with an injection, as he had suggested many times. Ah, there they are, he thought to himself with relief, examining her face more closely. All her wrinkles are still there, and there are even new ones. Indeed, fine lines radiated from the corners of her eyes to her temples, and a telltale line had formed from the corner of her mouth downward. Yet, strangely, they were barely noticeable, and did not detract from her appearance at all. And those legs, where had they come from? Long, shapely, and beautifully accentuated by her slim jeans. Her entire figure was remarkably well proportioned, so much so that he suddenly thought, if only all three of our girls took after Kelly, that would be wonderful. In short, before him stood an astonishingly beautiful woman who seemed far younger than her actual age, especially considering all the children and problems she had experienced. Admitting this surprising revelation to himself, he looked at the woman again from under his eyelashes. Strangely, she hadn't changed much. At least, she hadn't done anything drastic to her appearance. Yet the impression she made was astonishing. She bloomed like a May rose, as if forgetting that she had long passed her 40s. "Kelly, is that you?" he blurted out, astonished. Even now he got ashamed, recalling her response to his foolish question. "And who were you expecting? Listen, maybe I misunderstood something and you arranged to meet someone else here. If so, I'll quickly tidy up and leave, don't worry." And then the most outrageous part began, their conversation. He had thought through every word so carefully, meticulously choosing and arranging each phrase. He even found himself mouthing the words in public, rehearsing what he would say to her. To himself he seemed so reasonable, wise and calm. His words were noble, fair and self-critical, yet he had no intention of humbling himself before Kelly, begging for anything, or asking for forgiveness. After all, what old scores could there be between people who had lived together for 15 years and had 3 grown daughters? "Kelly, you know, I've been thinking a lot about us," he began solemnly and meaningfully. "And I think that 3 years ago we made a mistake. You see? That decision to separate was wrong." "We made a mistake. Our decision," she echoed in surprise. "But you left me, kindly leaving me with the girls, debts and your sick mother and aunt. Do you really think that was my decision? And what do you mean by us now?" "Kelly, you know what I mean. Why are you nitpicking at words? I'm not talking about details, but in general." Simon felt the conversation veering off course. And why was she oversimplifying everything, blaming him? In reality, it had all been much more complex and tangled. "Kelly, I'm talking about us, about our feelings. You see? Yes, of course, I'm also to blame, but I've realised it all. And I think we need to stop looking for someone else to blame and just—" He looked up and suddenly stopped mid-sentence. Kelly was looking at him intently, but her eyes were laughing, and it wasn't a kind, modest, forgiving laugh suitable for a woman in this situation. It was a clear, malicious and mocking laughter. She was laughing at him. All his carefully chosen, thought-out and measured words and phrases were utterly useless. Kelly simply refused to listen to him, laughing and interrupting his solemn speech. "Simon, you're a clever one. You say all the right things, but it's too late. I'm no longer interested in any of this, you see?" "Not even a tiny bit. Let me explain it to you somehow. Remember when the girls were little? They would line up chairs, play train, and shout to each other. 'Dear passenger, you're late. Your train has left.' Well, Simon, your train has left too, a long time ago. So long ago that they've even removed the tracks." There was no point in continuing the conversation with this insensitive, unresponsive, and, as it turned out, rather cruel woman, and Simon, trying to maintain his composure and keep his lips from trembling, looked at his ex-wife and sighed deeply. "Well, Kelly, I must admit I'm disappointed. Honestly, I expected a different reception. But it seems that over the years you've become more cruel and heartless. So be it." Truthfully, until the very end, he hoped that Kelly would suddenly shudder, sniffle and rush to him, saying, "Simon, dear, sweetheart, forgive me. I don't know what came over me. Of course, I'm happy you're back. Thank God you're back. We've been waiting for you, the girls and I, and we've been hoping." But what actually happened was quite different. Kelly paused for a moment, as if also realizing the significance of the moment, and then delivered her parting words. "Simon, don't be offended, okay? As they say, to each his own. You cooked up this mess yourself. Now you have to eat it with a full spoon." That was particularly harsh. Only Kelly could remind him so sarcastically of his first and almost forgotten profession, although, if his life continues as it is, he might have to remember his plumbing skills and deal with sewage again. He left his former apartment, stiff as a board, went downstairs and headed to the bus stop. She's probably watching him now and laughing. Thank God none of the girls were home. Later he wandered aimlessly around his tiny room, trying to distract himself, but neither TV nor a magazine nor even a cigarette helped. All he could see was Kelly, infuriatingly beautiful and equally infuriatingly cheerful. He heard her silly and cruel words about the missed train, the mess he'd made, and the spoon he now had to eat it with. It seemed Kelly hadn't lost her village mannerisms and expressions. Let her sit there alone, biting her elbows, though she doesn't look like she's pining away. And she's not alone. It's he who is truly alone. After tossing and turning until midnight, he gave up on another restriction and downed half a glass of cognac, then lay down and after a couple more hours of restlessness, finally fell asleep. And as this morning showed, he might have been better off not waking up. Sinking into even deeper melancholy, he stared blankly out the window. If Simon had the superpower to see through space and walls and observe the one he was constantly thinking about, he would have been incredibly surprised. He would have seen her smiling, skipping around the apartment like a young girl, and occasionally bursting into utterly carefree laughter. Then Kelly would approach the mirror, look at her reflection and tap her forehead, still wearing that infuriating, light-hearted smile. In short, he would have noticed that she was content and inappropriately cheerful, especially considering their meeting the day before, a meeting between two former spouses who had been married for nearly 15 years. Yes, it had been 3 years since their separation, but is that enough time to forget everything and stop valuing all the good times they had? She really is an astonishingly heartless woman. Instead of being upset and thinking about what happened, she's practically dancing on one foot, singing loudly, despite never having a good voice, and even decided out of the blue to go buy new shoes. And then, perhaps he would have been even more confused. But since people can't see through distances, Simon sat alone with his thoughts, feeling a growing resentment toward this cruel, heartless, irresponsible woman who had simply disregarded his feelings and emotions. And one question kept pounding in his head, like a persistent woodpecker in a tree hollow. Why is she doing this to me? Why? Simon Alford was born into a small family that others, without much originality, called a matriarchy. In a small apartment lived 2 sisters, Teresa and Meredith, and their mother Harriet. The girl's father had died long ago from complications of a simple infection, and Harriet, widowed young, raised 2 girls alone, bitterly rejoicing that they were not boys. After all, dealing with 2 boys without a man in the family would have been, as she thought, beyond her capabilities. Harriet somehow managed to raise her daughters on her own, giving them health, education, and the guidelines in life. However, something must have been wrong with her upbringing, because neither Teresa nor Meredith found true happiness. The elder, Teresa, got married, stayed there for a while, and then, completely disillusioned, returned to her mother. She tucked away her management degree, ambitions, and hopes for a better future in the far corner of a cabinet and, without much thought, took a job as a salesperson in a clothes store. Meredith was much prettier and more cheerful than her sister, and their mother genuinely hoped that Meredith's life would turn out better than Teresa's. At first everything seemed to be going well. She enrolled in college, and in the middle of her studies she began a relationship with a classmate. This friendship grew so strong that Harriet, seeing her daughter return late from a date, decided to have a serious talk with her. "Meredith, I'm sorry to pry into your personal life, but are you sure your relationship with Alex is safe?" she asked. "Mum?" Meredith seemed shocked by her mother's tactlessness. "Have you lost your mind? This is my very personal life. Alex is a wonderful person, and I have a good head on my shoulders, even if you think otherwise. I just don't want you to suffer and cry and tell me you don't know what to do or how to live." Harriet quietly ended the pointless conversation, but 6 months later she heard, "Mum, I don't know what to do or how to live." The mother took a deep breath, mentally calculating her options for extra shifts at the hospital, and said, "Well, you have 2 choices, like any woman in your situation. Either you do something I can't even say out loud, and if you do, remember that I won't speak to you again, or you can have the baby. It's early, yes, but you won't be the first or the last. Since this is how life turned out, I won't refuse a grandson or a granddaughter. It seems to be my only hope for continuing the family line, although I hope it's a boy. I've realised I'm not a good parent for girls. Maybe I'll do better with a boy. Or does your wonderful man plan to raise the child himself?" Seeing the colour drain from her daughter's face, Harriet understood everything. "So, you haven't told him anything? Why?" Why? Why? Because he doesn't want any of this. You know how he is. You've seen his family, his plans. He's planning to leave this place." Harriet couldn't understand how any of this excused the young man from his responsibilities. "You need to tell him you're pregnant," she said sternly to her daughter. "Or what? You won't speak to me?" Meredith asked sarcastically. "Not because you'll torment yourself for the rest of your life and be ashamed in front of your child for doing so," Harriet replied firmly. The woman never blamed anyone but herself for what happened to her daughters. She must have failed to do something important to protect Teresa, and especially Meredith, from rash decisions, from their naive trust in others' nobility. Or perhaps they were all just very unlucky in life. Meredith's boyfriend, unfortunately, was just another link in this chain of misfortune. Without a moment's hesitation, Alex suggested that Meredith deal with the situation quickly and radically, and then end their relationship. So, like her older sister, Meredith returned to her mother's care, but not alone. In due time she gave birth to a baby boy who, as if the heavens had finally heard Harriet's pleas, was born healthy and strong. "Thank God!" Harriet exclaimed, looking at the loudly crying, red-faced and healthy-looking baby boy. "At least there's a man in the house now." She had been a bit worried about how Meredith would be after the birth of her son. After all, Meredith had clearly been offended by her mother's ultimatum. She was disappointed in men in general, and in one man in particular. Often this disappointment manifested in rather bitter outbursts against her innocent mother. Who knows how she would behave? Would she be a good mother to the little one? or would her past grievances and disappointments be more important? But from the first days after little Simon came home, Harriet's fears were dispelled. Meredith turned out to be not just a good and responsible mother, but almost obsessively so. She worried constantly about the baby, barely leaving his side, and if not for Harriet's strict supervision, she probably would never have put him down. Even when Simon was sleeping peacefully, Meredith would sit by his crib, gazing at his tiny face with a blissful smile. Every gesture, smile, sound, and new movement from him filled Meredith with awe. She watched him intently, holding her breath, and then spent hours recounting everything to her mother when she returned from her shift. "Mum, can you believe it? Simon lifted his head all by himself today and held it for a whole minute. Isn't that amazing? He's so advanced and strong, isn't he?" "Meredith, you might be surprised," Harriet replied with a smile, "but all babies his age do that. It's great, but there's nothing extraordinary or supernatural about it. It's normal." However, Meredith seemed categorically unwilling to apply the words normal and ordinary to her son. Everything he did, following the typical path of infant development, immediately became genius, amazing and astonishing. Even the bubbles of saliva and mucus that all babies blow were special when Simon did it. Teresa, for a long time, barely participated in the family life that had drastically changed with the arrival of the baby. She occasionally performed some minor tasks with a rather indifferent attitude, seemingly uninterested in the boy, treating him like a new piece of furniture. Teresa's heart has really hardened, Harriet thought bitterly. But one day as she opened the front door she heard, "Well, who do we have here looking so cute? Who's going to eat all this porridge and then go for a walk?" Has Meredith caught a cold or something? Her voice sounds strange, Harriet wondered. A minute later her surprise turned to astonishment, and she nearly lost her voice. Teresa was bent over a high chair where Simon sat, confidently smearing porridge across the tray with both hands as Teresa fed him. Teresa's usually stern and frowning face was softened by an expression of tenderness and joy, as if she herself didn't quite understand what was happening. But the fact remained, her tough exterior had cracked. A flood of unreleased and seemingly forever preserved auntie love poured out onto the boy. From that day on, Teresa and Meredith competed to care for Simon, vying for the chance to bathe him, feed him, take him for walks and sing lullabies. Harriet watched this sudden doubling of motherhood with a mix of irony and concern. "Remember, we're raising a boy," she tried to remind them. "We shouldn't spoil Simon too much." "Oh, Mum," Meredith would wave her off, with Teresa's full support. "Stop it! How can you spoil such a little one? And with what? It's not like we have the means. As for your strict male upbringing, he'll grow up and then we'll be strict. But for now we are going to play horsey." Harriet looked at her eldest daughter, ready and eager on all fours, shaking her head like a stallion, and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. One good thing about the situation was that Teresa and Meredith, united by their shared adoration, had grown closer as sisters. Harriet couldn't remember the last time they had chatted so warmly. So they lived, working and raising Simon, despite Harriet's efforts to steer his upbringing in a different direction. Simon couldn't help but grow up spoiled. And not just spoiled, but convinced that the world existed solely to fulfill his desires and listen to his new ones. How else could a boy turn out, who, from about the age of 5, heard that he was the head of their family? That the title of head involved not only rights but also responsibilities was something no one bothered to tell Simon. By that time Harriet, exhausted from endless work, quietly passed away, leaving these parting words. "Meredith, Don't be angry at what I'm about to say. We've already spoiled Simon, and there's nothing we can do about it. But at least try not to let him become what his father once did. Don't let him become a scoundrel." Meredith was horrified by her mother's words. How could anyone think such things about their boy? Could he even be compared to anyone, let alone the scoundrel who happened to be his father? Simon was growing into a real man, and if he wanted the best for himself, well, that was right. Her son deserved the best. Meredith was totally certain in that. But the best didn't seem to be falling at Simon's feet. He wasn't a bad student, but he lacked enthusiasm, and no one ever pushed him to do better. He made friends, lost keys and notebooks, rode his bike, kicked a football in the courtyard, pulled girls' pigtails at school, admired the neighbour's dog, feared the school janitor, and yearned to explore the wonderful world of boyish secrets behind the garages. In short, he was a typical, normal teenager. But one thing set him apart from his peers, an as yet unconscious sense of power over women. For now he only had power over the two women living with him in the same apartment, his mother and his aunt. But this power was real and undeniable, and who said he wouldn't be able to extend it in the future to other members of the fairer sex, at least to those who interested him? Especially since he had the looks for it. Not a movie star, of course, but if rumours and glances were to be believed, he was far from being at the bottom of the schoolgirls' rankings. In fact, he was among the leaders. Simon could intend be grateful for his appearance to his mother and unknown father. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and preferred not to cut his hair, after realizing that glances with a lock of hair falling over his forehead had a much stronger effect on people, especially women, than a simple, straightforward look. After watching a movie with an actor who was the idol of his classmate, and whom he slightly resembled according to some remarks, Simon adopted the habit of smiling mysteriously and slightly squinting. However, this last habit sent his mother and aunt into a panic, as they suddenly thought Simon had vision problems, and it took him a lot of effort to convince them that he was fine. The last grade crept up unexpectedly. Suddenly it became clear that Simon Alford had neither good grades, talents, nor any specific knowledge, and surprisingly, neither his natural charm nor his good looks could help him get into college. This was the first serious setback in Simon's life. He suddenly didn't get what he wanted. All his classmates, the boys worth befriending, went on to further education, but he, the magnificent Simon, was left with no idea what to do next. "At your mercy, I can't go to college because we don't have any money. Fine, then I'll go to be a plumber. And you should be ashamed of yourselves," Simon said to his mother and aunt, in a fit of anger at the whole world. And to Meredith and Teresa's horror, Simon really did apply to vocational school to become a plumber. "Simon," Meredith pleaded, "but it's so dirty and smelly." "It doesn't just smell, it stinks," Simon replied grimly. "Well, if there's no money for a clean and prestigious education, then I'll learn where it's free and dirty." Speaking gloomily about the hardships of his future profession, Simon was being quite deceitful. His choice was difficult, but not entirely selfless. In reality, despite its aroma, the profession of a plumber held many promising prospects for Simon, as hard as it was for Teresa and Meredith to believe. And the main proof of this was their neighbour Todd, the plumber. He was a cheerful, kind-hearted man who, having no children of his own, welcomed the neighbourhood kids with kind words and life advice. And most importantly, he seemed to have money. Maybe not a lot, not a fortune, but real money. At least in his spare time, which he had plenty of. Todd wore great sneakers, brand-name sportswear, drank expensive beer without worrying about the time, and most surprisingly, drove a nice car that seemed luxurious to the inexperienced Simon. And Simon thought, why not? Todd also confirmed the rightness of his choice, patting him on the shoulder and saying, "That's right, go study. Although in our line of work, brains aren't the most important thing. People's pipes and faucets will leak and burst as long as they live on this earth. You, Simon, will always have your bread and butter. But what you put on top of that butter will be up to you. And your looks, well, let's just say, in our plumbing business, you can reach great heights." Simon didn't fully understand the words of his not-so-sober neighbour at the time, but later, in vocational school, he often heard things like, "Simon, are you going to take a wrench on your cause, or do you plan to manage without it?" He brushed off the jokes, but secretly relied on his masculine charm and attractiveness. After graduating, Simon began his working life, which turned out to be much harder, dirtier and smellier than he had imagined. The district where he lived and worked was old. The houses were built many years ago and showed their age. The pipes he tirelessly repaired and replaced stubbornly started leaking and bursting in new places. Soon, Simon felt like his entire life had turned into one giant pipe, constantly dripping water and, with it, his years and youth. Moreover, the residents of the apartments in the buildings he serviced were all old and stingy, so the serious earnings that the unforgettable Todd had once inspired him with were not materializing. "Simon, maybe you should leave this awful job," his mother would ask plaintively, carefully picking up the dirty overalls he had tossed on the floor. "And who will feed me, you or Auntie?" he would retort. "There's no point in discussing it now. You didn't let me get a proper education. Now deal with it." After such exchanges, his mother would feel guilty and fall silent for a long time. Simon would lie down on the old sofa and thoroughly pity himself. Life was clearly taking him in the wrong direction, and he lacked the desire, strength and skill to turn it around. He didn't want to go on that particular call. He had been to the apartment where water was gushing from the pipes many times before, and the annoying old lady who lived there couldn't understand that his patches on the rusty pipes were as useful as a bandage on a corpse. She demanded a replacement but refused to pay for it. In short, he already hated his upcoming visit to the tiresome apartment. With an expression of regret and fatigue, he rang the doorbell and froze in astonishment. Instead of the familiar, perpetually disgusted face that resembled a baked apple, a young girl's face greeted him with an open smile. The girl was grinning as if she had come not to fix an old smelly rusty pipe, but to give her an incredible gift, starting with a bouquet of fresh flowers, which he was supposedly holding instead of his old, greasy, shapeless tool bag. "Oh, hello," the girl said with suspicious enthusiasm. "And who are you?" "The groom," Simon muttered, slightly annoyed. The girl burst into laughter, loud and genuine, as if he had said something incredibly funny and witty. "What a silly girl you are. Why are you laughing?" Simon thought to himself, still irritated. "Don't mind me," the girl waved her hand, wiping away tears of laughter. "It's just that I was told there's a superstition. If the first person you meet in a new place is a man, it brings good luck. And here you are, not just any man, but a groom." "Oh, I don't know. Usually a plumber means trouble," Simon unexpectedly joked. He suddenly wanted the girl to stay and keep laughing. As he pondered these strange feelings, his old acquaintance, the apartment owner, rushed out of the bathroom. "Look at him! Water's gushing out and he's flirting with a girl. And you, Kelly, don't distract the man. Let Simon get to work." That's how, with any effort, they met. Kelly had recently arrived in the city from some remote village to study at the university and was temporarily staying with her relative, the apartment owner. She had barely managed to leave home. Her parents didn't want to let her go, which was understandable. They had a stud farm and a large household, with 2 brothers and a sister, or maybe 2 sisters and a brother. He didn't quite catch that. Anyway, it didn't matter. Clearly, Kelly's parents were very fertile and loved children, and Kelly was their eldest. She would only have to smile with her relative for a couple of weeks because she was moving into her grandmother's apartment. It was just undergoing renovation. Kelly's grandmother, her father's mother, had left the apartment to her favourite granddaughter, specifically so she could study without worrying about housing. She had already been accepted into the economics faculty, which was no surprise. After all, she had graduated from high school, albeit a rural one, with honours, and had won every academic competition. She also had a gymnastics ranking, had studied at an art school, volunteered at a festival. The only thing she couldn't do was sing. She had neither the voice nor the ear for it. It was a shame because sometimes she felt an overwhelming urge to sing, but she sang anyway, even though her father laughed at her, and Alf, their spaniel, always joined in with his howling. To his amazement, Simon knew all of this by the time he finished fixing the pipes. He couldn't recall if he had asked any questions, or if the information had just flowed out of the girl like water from his hated pipes, but as he left the apartment, he realised they were no longer strangers. As they said goodbye, he found himself saying something he had never said before. "Listen, maybe we could go out sometime? Just the 2 of us. Tomorrow, for example. I could show you around the city." He braced himself for her response, expecting her to say, "No way, you're just a sewer leech," or something along those lines. Or maybe she would just smile politely and say, "No, I'm sorry, I completely forgot. I have so much to do tomorrow, and the day after I'm leaving, and besides, I can find someone more decent to show me around the city." But instead, the girl looked up at him with her big grey eyes and a wide smile. "Oh, are you serious? That would be great. Thank you, I'd love to." Later, back at home, he thought about what had happened. Why should he be interested in some village girl, even if she did have her own apartment? She was simple, naive, and had managed to tell him her entire life story in just 10 minutes. And she dressed plainly. In short, there was nothing special about her. And then he imagined Kelly again, petite, slender, and so well-proportioned that it didn't matter what she wore. He pictured her face with her lips with a smile on them, her dark hair and grey eyes. In principle, yes, there was nothing special about her either, but he couldn't help but smile, and he eagerly watched the clock, willing the hands to move faster, so that this now unnecessary day would end and tomorrow would come. They met, and once again he was filled with an inexplicable sense of joy and excitement, as if Kelly was radiating invisible rays of happiness. He noticed again that she wasn't a classic beauty and didn't wear much makeup, although it seemed she had put on some gloss on her lips. Yes, it was pleasant to look at her, but even more pleasant was the feeling of her attentive and admiring gaze on him. No one had looked at him like that in a long time. He felt young and eager, ready to live, to do something, to move forward, and finally show the world that Simon Alford was. "Why don't you continue your studies?" she asked him on their 2nd or 3rd meeting. "These days you can't get anywhere without a good education." "Oh, I'm sorry," she added quickly. "I didn't mean to offend you." "You didn't offend me," Simon lied, feeling a pang of resentment. "I know I can't spend my whole life messing around with pipes." "Oh, don't say that," she protested. "You do important work. People can't live without you. You're more useful than most specialists with diplomas." "Just look at my relative," Kelly laughed. "She can't go a day without mentioning you." Saying this, Kelly quickly turned serious again, or as serious as she could be. "It's just that I don't think you're pleased with it. You want something more, don't you?" "Well, yes," he admitted. I'd like to go to college, maybe study engineering, but I can't. I'm terrible at algebra and physics, and besides, I hate studying. To be honest, I'd like to start my own business. I have this great idea." A minute later, he was enthusiastically explaining his grand plan for a company that would provide all necessary household and repair services. "That's amazing," Kelly exclaimed. "But you'd need a lot of money for that." "That's amazing," Kelly exclaimed. "But you need a lot of money for that," Simon argued. "Oh, you should never stop dreaming," she smiled. "Don't forget your dreams and desires, and they will come true." Never in his life had Simon felt so confident as he did with Kelly. For the first time he felt like a real man, not just pretending to be one. She looked at him with respect and even admiration. Soon Kelly moved into her apartment, started university, and began seeing Simon. His mother liked her immediately and wholeheartedly. "She's a wonderful girl, simply amazing," she said, her eyes shining. Simon was taken aback by such a quick conclusion. Knowing his mother and her pathological attachment to him, he expected jealousy, criticism and nitpicking, all the things that stories about mother-in-laws and daughter-in-law warn about. But it turned out quite the opposite. Probably because he, Simon, couldn't have chosen an unworthy girl. Most likely that was it. Indeed, it wasn't about Kelly being so wonderful. 6 months later they got married. Simon was overwhelmed by meeting Kelly's large and boisterous family, who nearly trampled his mother and Aunt Teresa in their joy at the wedding. The only thing that reconciled him to this invasion was that Kelly's father had brought them a substantial sum of money and a brand new car as a gift. Despite her rural background, Kelly turned out to be an exceptionally brilliant student. She graduated from university early and, having tossed her naturally read diploma aside, sat down across from Simon. "Well, shall we make your dreams come true?" she declared. "What dreams?" he asked, startled. "You know, the firm, the services, remember? Look, I've already drawn up a business plan. I've worked out the budget, made estimates for the client base. By the way, there are several housing that need exactly these services. Here are all the phone numbers. Of course, we'll need money, but we can borrow from my family at a reasonable rate. Anyway, I'll handle the finances and accounting. I've also found a lawyer. You just need to put together a team." Simon looked at Kelly in alarm. "Wait, Kelly, not so fast. We need to think this through." "It's not too fast. And besides, we need to hurry up and make some money because... She suddenly stumbled, which was unlike her. "Why?" he asked, looking up at her. "Because we're going to have a baby soon," Kelly smiled. Simon didn't even notice when they had a little girl. Their life didn't change much, although he had been told that his wife should become slower and calmer during this period. But Kelly seemed to defy all the rules, and she gave birth to her first daughter almost without taking a break from her work. Somewhere between financial reports and rushed visits to the hospital to see her suddenly ill mother-in-law. Surprisingly, the business was going well. Over a few years, they assembled a strong team of craftsmen. The repair and installation services they provided were quick and high quality. They offered full guarantees on their work, and if any problems arose, everything was fixed instantly, without questions or complaints. They started making good money, then serious money, which allowed them to move to a larger apartment. "Well, that's good, because we need more space," Kelly declared. "Why?" Simon asked, feeling a sense of déjà vu. "Because we're having a second child," she announced. A few months later, their second daughter was born. Kelly didn't slow down in her work, affairs, relationships, or, as it turned out, childbearing. When the eldest daughter turned 5, she suddenly looked down and, uncharacteristically shy, glanced at her husband. "So," he shuddered, "do we need a bigger apartment again?" "Well, yes," she nodded. "Kelly, 3 is too many," Simon exclaimed in fear. "Oh, come on, Simon. 3? That's just 1 more than 2. And besides—" Kelly had fully recovered and laughed in her usual style. "I promise you, this is the last child and the last apartment. Then we'll build a house." The 3rd baby was also a girl. The girls were all alike, strong, pretty, dark-haired and brown-eyed. They grew up as if competing over who spoke more words at a year old, who walked first, or who learned to read first. Kelly still managed everything, working, cooking, ironing his shirts, and singing in her terrible, completely off-key voice, as if the number of children truly made no difference to her. And suddenly Simon felt bored and resentful. Here he was in his 5th decade, a family man, a successful businessman, yet he still felt like he was under someone's thumb. And his friends' jokes about being the head of a woman's republic had recently started to sound offensive, as if they said head ironically, meaning something entirely different. And of course it was all Kelly's fault, who had apparently completely forgotten who the real head of the household was. "You've destroyed the man in me," Simon told Kelly. "A man should be strong and independent. He should be the head of the family, the provider and the protector." "So?" Kelly said, surprised. "What part of that bothers you?" "Everything," he declared. "I don't make any decisions. For some reason, I always have to consult. But you do whatever you want. You even had children without my opinion. And I'm tired of all this noise and commotion. I can't even sit quietly in my own home. And your pancakes. In short, I want a divorce," Simon declared, trying to sound manly and independent. "You know what? That's not such a bad idea," Kelly replied thoughtfully, as if she had seen something new and surprising. "To be honest, I'm tired of all this too. I agree. Leave." He was shocked by her compliance. He had expected hysteria, misunderstandings, shoutings and pleading. But Kelly surprised him again, even after 15 years together. "But why should I be the one to leave? Why do you get to keep everything? The apartment, the kids?" Simon blurted out. "Yes, why indeed?" Kelly retorted. "It's not fair. You should get everything, of course. The kids and the apartment that comes with them. How many of the girls will you take? 1? 2? Oh, wait, you're a hero, so you're taking all 3. Fine, so it's settled. You stay here, and I'll leave you and pay you alimony." Simon looked at his wife in panic. Was she serious? Of course he loved his daughters, but the thought of being solely responsible for them, thinking only about their needs and the household, was overwhelming. Lessons, braids, illnesses, activities, lunches, dinners, dresses, boots, pillows, dishes, books, cutlets. All these responsibilities flooded his mind, and he staggered as if Kelly had already left, and he was alone with his girls and all their problems. "Wait, Kelly, we can't do like this," he stammered in fear. "Oh, relax, I was just kidding," Kelly chuckled. "For a moment it seemed like there was a real man in you." And so he left, feeling free for the first time in years. Kelly handed over the company to him. They agreed on alimony, and they went their separate ways. At first everything seemed fine. He found a new woman, nothing like Kelly with her sturdy figure. She was beautiful, with luscious curls, long shiny nails, perfectly made-up eyes, and full bright lips. Her figure was stunning. He took her on tropical vacations, bought her expensive jewellery, but then everything started to fall apart. It turned out that Kelly had been the driving force behind their company. She found clients, negotiated the best contracts, sourced materials, and handled the accounting. Without her, the company struggled and eventually collapsed. leaving him with debts and problems. Within a year, he had spent all his money and sold his car. He remembered his mother, or rather, the apartment she owned, and returned home. Meredith and Teresa were surprisingly healthy and well off. They had new cosy robes, a fridge full of food, and a large plasma TV playing soap operas. "Kelly visits all the time, and the girls come over too," Meredith said, looking at her son with a new, unfamiliar, strange gaze. "Your room is free if you need it." But he couldn't stay long. It was too painful to see his mother and aunt with their newfound strength. He rented a small apartment and realized that he wanted to get his life back, his prosperity, confidence, daughters, his mother's proud gaze, and Kelly, of course. He could get it all back. It was up to him. He was a man. He was Simon Alford. That was his plan until yesterday. And this morning, Simon was still sitting over the ruined eggs and thinking about the unfairness of life and the cruelty of women in particular. "Your train has left," he remembered Kelly's words. She was his wife, the mother of his children. But how could she do this to him? How? The cheerful screams of the girls, the smell of fresh pancakes, and his mother's voice calling him "dear," echoed in his mind. But it was just a mirage. Esther sat in the kitchen, tears streaming down her face. Before her stood an open bottle of wine, an expensive, elegantly packaged gift from a friend on her birthday 6 months ago. Esther had never been fond of alcohol, so the bottle remained untouched in the bar until tonight. Well, it was helpful after all, Esther thought, recalling the look of contempt and almost hatred in her husband's eyes. She sighed deeply and poured herself another glass. The wine was delicious, offering a pleasant warmth in her chest, though it brought no relief from her sorrow. Hanging on the back of a chair was the dress that had sparked the argument. But was it really about the dress? Aaron had hurled accusations and insults with such vehemence, as if he had been holding them back for years, waiting for the right moment to unleash them on his wife. And the dress? It was just a piece of fabric that, an hour ago, had seemed like a wonderful garment, flattering Esther's figure. She had bought the dress for tonight's celebration, the anniversary of the company where Aaron worked as the head of sales. The event promised to be grand. A restaurant, invited celebrities, fireworks. Esther hadn't been out in so long. Trips to the cinema with her grandchildren didn't count. She wanted to feel beautiful and important again, especially as the wife of such an influential man. Esther had imagined how wonderful the evening would be with Aaron. It seemed like it would be a magical celebration. She had gone shopping with her friend Martha, whom she had known since their first year at university. Martha was smart, beautiful, and always kept up with the latest fashion trends, so Esther trusted her completely with choosing an outfit for the corporate event. Esther herself preferred more classic styles, long dresses, modest cuts and subtle colours, but Martha had other ideas. "Why are you looking at those old-fashioned dresses?" Martha exclaimed. "You're not even 50 yet. By today's standards, you're practically a young woman." "Come on, Martha," Esther laughed. "I have 2 grandchildren." "So what? That doesn't mean anything. Look at me. We're the same age and I'm still the mother of a school-aged child. So there." Martha was always full of life and energy, a true party girl. She made Esther try on dresses she would never have considered. Bold colours and modern cuts. Surprisingly, they looked great on her, making her feel younger and more vibrant. Esther was amazed at her reflection in the mirror, and her mood lifted. She realised she still looked good, not like a grandmother at all. In the end, Esther chose a bright turquoise dress that Martha insisted brought out the colour of her eyes. It was knee-length, with an open back and fitted top, a style Esther had never worn before. She loved how it made her feel, not like a housewife or a mother, but like a stylish, attractive woman. She even smiled, imagining Aaron's reaction. Maybe he would be impressed, and she would see that old spark of admiration in his eyes again. "I'll take it," Esther declared, looking at Martha. "Good choice," Martha smiled approvingly. Esther hadn't shown the dress to Aaron beforehand. He hadn't seemed interested anyway. Lately he had become distant and indifferent. It hadn't happened overnight, but gradually, almost imperceptibly. Esther knew she was partly to blame. She had become too absorbed in her children and grandchildren, forgetting about herself and Aaron. He was the provider, and she was the homemaker. Their roles had been clear from the start, and everyone seemed content. But sometimes Esther missed the days when she was more than just a good housewife to Aaron, when she was his muse. He used to call her that and shower her with compliments. His eyes would light up when he looked at her, making her feel beautiful, loved, desired, and incredibly happy. They had met as university students in their final year. Aaron had boldly approached a group of girls, including Esther and Martha, as they strolled through the city centre one evening. The girls had just finished their exams and were upbeat. Esther was particularly happy. She had aced all her exams and was looking forward to a summer break. Aaron was handsome and charming, the captain of the university's basketball team. He asked if he could join their walk, and they agreed. Aaron entertained them with jokes and stories about the historic buildings they passed. It was clear he was interested in Esther, and she was flattered by his attention. They exchanged numbers that night, and their romance blossomed. Aaron would bring her flowers and whisper sweet words. He often told her she was his destiny, that he had known it from the moment he saw her. Esther loved hearing those words and felt incredibly happy with Aaron. But tonight, as she sat alone in the kitchen, the memories of their past happiness only deepened her sadness. The dress, meant to bring them closer, had instead driven them further apart. By the end of her final year, Esther discovered she was pregnant. Of course, they hadn't planned for this. They intended to finish their studies, establish themselves in their careers, gain some experience, and then think about marriage. Interestingly, it was Aaron who often discussed their future wedding, as if it were a given that they would eventually marry. And then suddenly came this news. Esther shared everything with her beloved. She was a bit afraid of his reaction, fearing she might see fear in his eyes, or disappointment, sadness, or even anger. But Aaron smiled and embraced her tightly. Esther froze in his warm embrace, sheltered from all the world's troubles. And she realized she had worried about nothing. Everything would be all right. Aaron was by her side, and she was safe with him. "Well, this isn't how I imagined this moment, but what can we do now? Esther, will you be my wife?" She nodded in agreement, too overwhelmed with emotion to speak. They got married. The wedding wasn't lavish, but it was joyful and lively, with many young guests, Esther's friends and Aaron's friends. Their families quickly found common ground and pooled their resources to buy the young couple a small one-bedroom apartment. It was their own little nest, a place to start their family life together. Esther didn't look for a job. With her maternity leave approaching and a difficult pregnancy marked by constant morning sickness, dizziness, and less than ideal test results, she was hospitalized several times to prevent miscarriage. Esther was terrified of losing the baby. It seemed like she wouldn't be able to bear it. Aaron was always by her side, supporting and comforting her. He, too, eagerly awaited the arrival of their unplanned but already beloved child. Jason was born on time, a healthy, rosy-cheeked baby, with his father's grey eyes and his mother's long lashes. Aaron and Esther learned to be parents together, under the tactful and unobtrusive guidance of Jason's grandmothers. It was a wonderful time. The apartment was small, but it was filled with happiness. Aaron rushed home from work every evening to take Jason for a walk. He confessed to Esther that he felt proud and happy pushing the stroller with their little one. Meanwhile, Esther would prepare something delicious for them to eat. In the evenings they would lie on the pull-out sofa, with little Jason in the middle, watching a movie and making plans for the future. Esther thought that once Jason was a bit older, she would enroll him in kindergarten and finally start working. She didn't want her hard-earned diploma to gather dust. Due to her pregnancy, Esther hadn't had the chance to apply her knowledge in practice, and she was eager to start. Esther was proud of her husband. Aaron was a talented architect, quickly climbing the career ladder and increasing his salary. Esther wanted the same, to realize herself as a professional. She had always been a good student and was eager to start working, even preparing a work wardrobe in advance. And finally the day came when Jason started kindergarten, and Esther got her first long-awaited job. But then the difficulties began. Aaron was often away at the office until late at night, which was understandable given his endless meetings, new projects and business trips. Esther worked as an HR specialist in a small office until 6 p.m. After work, she had to pick up Jason from kindergarten by 7 p.m., take him for a walk, prepare dinner, and tidy up. It was incredibly challenging to juggle it all. Esther asked Aaron for help, but he shrugged it off. "I can't do anything about it. I have a lot of work. It's all for our future, you understand? We need to save enough for a bigger apartment, and I might get a promotion soon, which means even more money. I can't just drop everything to pick up our son from kindergarten on time." Esther nodded in agreement. Aaron was right. His work was crucial for their family's well-being, while her job was less significant and not as well paid. Then Jason started getting sick frequently. Esther knew this was common among children in kindergarten, and usually grandparents would help in such situations. However, both sets of grandparents were still young and working, so Esther had to take time off work to care for Jason. Naturally, her employer was not pleased. There was no talk of career growth or promotion. Esther struggled to keep up with her current job, especially since Jason would attend kindergarten for 2 weeks and then be sick for 3. Eventually, Esther was asked to resign. She cried on Aaron's shoulder that evening, and he comforted her, criticizing her insensitive bosses. And then he said, "That's it. Quit your job and stay home with Jason. I earn enough, and your peace of mind is more important to me." "But I want to work," Esther sobbed. "Your job isn't going anywhere. Jason won't be little forever. Stay home with him for a year or 2, and then you can go back to work. He won't get sick as often by then." So the couple decided it was best for everyone. Esther quit her job and became a stay-at-home mum. Their home was always clean and filled with the aroma of delicious food. A few years passed. Jason started school, and his frequent childhood illnesses became a thing of the past. The family no longer lived in their old 1-bedroom apartment, but in a spacious 3-bedroom apartment in the city centre. Aaron drove a luxury SUV and had given Esther a car she had long admired. Esther was ready to restart her career. The timing seemed perfect. She was nervous about the long break and lack of experience, but Aaron assured her that she would succeed, especially since she was still young. His words gave her confidence. Esther found a job in her field. A fast-growing company was hiring economists, and experience was not a requirement. Esther aced the interview and was offered the position the same day. Esther was excited and full of enthusiasm, looking forward to finally restarting her career. And then she received a surprise. She got pregnant. A storm raged within her as she struggled to accept how abruptly her plans and life had shifted instantly. The idea of returning to work was now out of the question. Aaron seemed almost relieved by the news. "This is great. Family and children are what matter most in life. And now we'll be a big family with many kids. I've always dreamed of this. I'll move mountains for you all." Esther smiled, pleased by her husband's reaction to the news of her pregnancy. She too wanted to move mountains, to work and achieve her goals, beyond being just a mother and homemaker. But those aspirations would have to wait, especially since soon it turned out that Esther was waiting for twins. Sheila and Kristen were born prematurely, as often happens with twins. The girls were frail and sickly. The first few years of their lives were a blur for Esther, filled with constant hospital visits, examinations, and rehabilitation. Aaron provided for the family financially, ensuring they had everything they needed, but he couldn't offer much physical help due to his demanding work schedule. Those years were challenging, both physically and emotionally. Esther was grateful not to have financial worries, but she also had no time for herself. Her friend Martha was dismayed by this. "How can you not take care of yourself? Look at your hair. You need to think about your figure. And your clothes. You're not an old woman. You have money. Let's go shopping. Update your wardrobe." Esther could only sigh. Martha led a vibrant life, working, dating, travelling, and socialising with friends. She couldn't understand Esther's situation, and their paths had diverged. They rarely saw each other now, much to Esther's regret. Time passed and the girls grew stronger. They didn't attend kindergarten due to their health issues, but by the time they started school, those days were behind them. Esther cherished the newfound freedom, having a few hours to herself each day. However, she no longer thought about returning to work. There was so much to do with the children, extracurricular activities, meals, and homework help. Aaron provided well for the family, and Esther felt it was too late to start a career after being out of the workforce for so long. However, deep inside, she envied Martha, who had recently returned to work after having a son. Martha juggled her career and motherhood effortlessly, living a full and active life. Esther, on the other hand, was content being a homemaker, supported by Aaron, who appreciated the comfort and stability she brought to their family. Eventually, Esther and Aaron realized their long-held dream of moving into their own home. Aaron bought a cottage in an upscale suburban neighborhood, complete with a garden. Esther threw herself into landscaping with enthusiasm, finding solace and happiness in tending to her plants and creating a beautiful outdoor space. Her life seemed perfect: a loving husband, wonderful children, and a beautiful home. She tried not to think about her unused college diploma, gathering dust on a shelf. The years flew by, and the children grew up quickly. Esther had always had a good relationship with them, and they navigated their teenage years smoothly. However, she sometimes felt lonely in the large house as her children became more independent, focused on their friends and social lives. It seemed like the perfect time to reconnect with Aaron. They had drifted apart, each consumed by their own responsibilities. Aaron worked tirelessly to provide for the family, often travelling and working late. Esther was devoted to the children, immersed in their needs and problems. Their conversations revolved around the kids, with little time for anything else. They occasionally went on family vacations, but even then, Aaron was often preoccupied with work, constantly on his phone or laptop. He loved his children, but spent catastrophically little time with them, unlike Esther, who was deeply involved in their lives. The children grew up. Jason graduated from university and started his own family, making Esther a grandmother at 47. She was overjoyed and eager to help with the grandchildren, but the young parents managed beautifully on their own. Esther cherished the time she spent with her grandchildren, taking them to the theatre or the park. Sheila and Kristen were still young and not rushing to start their own families. They were studying law at university, and Esther was proud of them. Sheila worked part-time as a model. Tall, slender and confident, she had always loved being the centre of attention since childhood. She was quite successful, already earning money from her modelling gigs. Her ambition was to conquer the capital first, and then, who knows, maybe even the world. Sheila had always been driven and ambitious. Kristen, on the other hand, was passionate about music. As a teenager, she mastered the piano, then the guitar, and later the drums. Now she was the official vocalist in a local band. She enjoyed performing and touring local venues, always eager to rehearse. Esther was proud that her daughters had hobbies and passions, something she felt she had lacked in her own life, which sometimes left her feeling unfulfilled. However, she never shared this feeling, not even with her closest friend, Martha. fearing she wouldn't be understood properly. Esther tended to her garden, read extensively, and enjoyed meeting with Martha, whose life was always full of excitement. Martha managed to juggle work, raising her son, navigating relationships, and maintaining a friendship with her son's father, a truly unique individual. It was no surprise that Esther turned to Martha for help in choosing an outfit for her husband's corporate event. This event was significant for Esther. She and Aaron hadn't attended a social function together in a long time. She looked forward to the celebration, the unity, the joy, the conversations over champagne, and her husband's attention. However, Aaron's invitation seemed almost routine, as if given reluctantly. He simply mentioned the upcoming company anniversary and the grand celebration planned for it. "Please, try to look decent. It's important to me," he had said. Esther chose to overlook the implication that she didn't usually look decent. After all, they had been together long enough to speak honestly with each other. The news of the corporate event excited Esther. She wanted to appear beautiful and attractive to her husband and his colleagues. However, upon examining herself in the mirror, she felt disheartened. She hadn't paid much attention to her appearance lately, and it showed. While she looked fine for home and family life, she knew she wouldn't make an impression at the event without some effort. Esther had always been slim and tall, with her daughters inheriting her figure. However, with age, she had gained some weight, making it impossible to wear a fitted dress. Her skin, though healthy from spending time outdoors in her garden, showed signs of aging. She didn't look like a fresh, blooming woman anymore, but then again, she was in her 5th decade. Esther turned to Martha for help, and her friend eagerly accepted the challenge. "We'll make you look so stunning, Aaron won't believe his eyes, and neither will his colleagues," Martha assured her. Esther felt relieved, knowing she wasn't alone in her quest to look her best. Martha understood how important this event was to her friend. Together, they visited a cosmetologist for some express procedures that significantly improved the appearance of Esther's skin, making her look younger and fresher. "With your money, you could even afford plastic surgery," Martha remarked, admiring the results. "Modern cosmetology and surgery can work wonders." Esther shrugged. She wasn't afraid of aging, but seeing her rejuvenated reflection in the mirror boosted her mood and self-esteem. Martha also took Esther to the gym, knowing that significant weight loss wouldn't happen in a week, but it was a start. Esther struggled with the unfamiliar exercises, but she enjoyed the feeling of lightness in her body afterward. Finally, it was time to find the perfect dress. Martha accompanied Esther on a shopping trip, determined to find her friend the ideal outfit for the corporate event. Esther was drawn to a sea foam green dress, which she initially thought was too youthful. However, Martha insisted she try it on. The dress accentuated Esther's eyes and complemented her tan. The length just above the knee was flattering, and the clever design hid her problem areas. "What a fantastic choice!" Martha exclaimed, admiring Esther in the dress. "You look 10 years younger and several pounds lighter." Esther admired her reflection, agreeing with Martha's assessment. She kept the dress a secret from Aaron, wanting to surprise him at the event. The much-anticipated evening finally arrived. Aaron had asked Esther to be ready by 7 o'clock. He was going to come home from work, change, and then they would head to the restaurant for the company's anniversary celebration. Esther was ready well before the appointed time. A makeup artist, recommended by Martha, had done her makeup, and Esther styled her hair herself. She completed her look with high-heeled shoes that matched the dress, appreciating how the heels elongated her figure. Esther was looking forward to his reaction when he finally saw her in her stunning outfit. She hoped that tonight Aaron would pay attention to her. Perhaps this evening would mark the beginning of their reunion, a journey back to each other. Those strong feelings they had experienced in their youth could not disappear without a trace. The sound of a key turning in the door echoed through the house, and Esther's heart raced as if she were about to go on a first date. She was a little nervous, but eager to see the admiration in Aaron's eyes. She quickly descended the stairs, her heels clicking against the floor. Aaron slowly raised his eyes to meet Esther's, who stood with a welcoming smile, awaiting his reaction. "What are you dressed up like a clown for?" Aaron snapped, his eyes filled with contempt and disdain. "What?" Esther exclaimed, taken aback. "The dress is too tight and revealing for someone your age. Have you even looked at yourself?" "Yes, I have," Esther replied honestly, her confidence shaken. Just moments ago she had seen a reflection of a woman who, though not young, was still attractive. "It looks ridiculous on you, like a saddle on a cow." Aaron continued, his anger escalating. "I asked you to buy something elegant and age-appropriate." "But it's a beautiful dress," Esther protested weakly. "It might be, but it's not suitable for you anymore." "Aaron, please!" "Look at yourself. You've let yourself go, turned into a frumpy housewife, and now you're wearing a dress meant for someone much younger." Esther's voice trembled as she fought back tears. Aaron's words were harsh and unexpected, each one piercing her heart. "How can I show up with you looking like this? It's embarrassing. Everyone else has normal wives, and I have you." This was too much for Esther. Aaron had never spoken to her like this before. He had been distant and indifferent, but never cruel. He stormed upstairs, slamming the door behind him, leaving Esther alone with her thoughts. The poor woman sank onto the couch, feeling defeated. The dress that had once made her feel like a queen now seemed like a mockery. She wanted to take it off, to hide from the harsh words that still echoed in her mind. 10 minutes later, Aaron came downstairs, dressed for the corporate event. He looked calm and composed, his earlier anger seemingly forgotten. He glanced at Esther, who sat in stunned silence. "Your mascara is smudged," he noted coldly. Esther wiped her cheek, her hand coming away streaked with black. She hadn't even realized she was crying. "I'm sorry," Aaron said gruffly. "I overreacted, but so did you. You shouldn't have dressed like that. I'll go alone and tell everyone you're not feeling well. I can't have you showing up looking like this. People will laugh at me." Esther nodded silently. She had no desire to go to the event now, feeling humiliated and unwanted. Aaron left the house. His mood lifted, leaving Esther to ponder the cruelty of his words and the emptiness of their once loving relationship. As he drove to the event, Aaron reflected on his harsh words. He knew he had hurt Esther, but he also felt justified in his anger. He didn't want to be seen with a wife who looked improper amongst his colleagues' younger, more glamorous wives. He wanted to maintain his image as a successful man with an attractive partner. Yet Aaron had another reason for looking forward to the corporate event. He was eager to get to know Lily, the new HR employee, better. With her striking auburn waves, enchanting green eyes, high cheekbones, full lips, and a sprinkling of golden freckles across her face, she was captivating. Lily tried to conceal her freckles with foundation, but they still peeked through, adding to her charm. Her graceful figure and elegant movements made her impossible to ignore. Aaron tried not to dwell on the fact that she was the same age as his eldest son. In his circle, such age differences were common. Many of his colleagues were in second or even third marriages with younger women, or had young mistresses. Aaron understood their appeal. His own wife, Esther, who had once seemed perfect, intelligent, empathetic, and understanding, had become a shadow of her former self. Though Aaron provided her with ample financial resources, she spent them on the garden, the house, and their children and grandchildren, rarely indulging in anything for herself. She didn't exercise or visit a cosmetologist. And Erin believed she could look much better if she took care of herself. Erin was an aesthete, always drawn to beauty, including attractive young women. He had engaged in numerous affairs and casual flings over the years. Esther suspected nothing. It was easy to deceive her. Work, business trips, late nights at the office. Esther believed it all. Did Erin feel any guilt? No, not at all. After all, it was Esther's fault. She had no right to complain. Living off his hard work, never denying herself anything, and never worrying about money. She could have shown more attention to him, taken better care of herself, to look more presentable. Then there was the upcoming corporate event. Lily had given Erin a meaningful look, hinting that she had bought a stunning outfit and beautiful lingerie for the occasion. It was more than a hint. It was almost a direct proposition. Erin couldn't remain indifferent to such a suggestion. There had always been sparks between him and Lily. She was alluring yet unattainable, but now she had made an open, unmistakable declaration. Her words were full of promise. But with Esther around, Lily won't even glance at him. She'll dance with someone else, and Erin would be left to watch with jealousy. Besides, he didn't want to appear in public with such an old wife. His colleagues would bring their glamorous wives, while he, the respected head of a large department, would show up with his frumpy spouse. It would be humiliating. Therefore, the day before the corporate event, Erin made up his mind. He wouldn't take Esther, but he needed a convincing reason to leave her behind. All day, Erin pondered the problem, both at the office and on his way home. Unable to come up with a solution, he entered the house in a gloomy mood. Suddenly, Esther rushed down the stairs to greet him, wearing a dress that made her look younger, but somehow improper. It was inappropriate for the corporate event. All the women would be in elegant dark dresses. Esther's outfit was unsuitable for such an occasion. Here's my excuse, Erin thought, grasping at it like a drowning man clutching a straw. He felt a surge of anger toward Esther, and his long, simmering irritation boiled over into a tirade. He did not spare her feelings, hoping she would be offended and refuse to go to the party. Yes, his wife looked frightened and confused, but the cherished refusal Erin did not get. So he had to spell it out himself, and it sounded convincing enough. There was truth in his words. He was indeed ashamed to appear with Esther at the event, but it wasn't about the dress. Esther was too old, too plump, too unrefined in his loveless eyes. In the end, Esther stayed home, and Erin went to the corporate event alone as he had wished. Colleagues asked about his wife, and he explained they were in the process of divorcing and no longer appeared together in public. In reality, Erin had not considered divorce. Esther might be a frumpy housewife, but she provided him comfort and stability. He was content with their arrangement, as long as she minded her own business and didn't impose on him. Lily, of course, danced with Erin that evening. She was enchanting, almost unreal in her beauty. Erin admired her and was glad Esther was not by his side. After the party, they went to the hotel. Erin felt happy and young, especially with such a beautiful, red-haired companion. The next morning, Erin went to work, and in the evening he reluctantly returned home. He knew he had to apologize to Esther, though he didn't feel particularly guilty. He just wanted to return to normal, a wife devoted to home, grateful for his provision. The house was silent. Esther did not come to greet him as usual. Erin assumed she was still upset, but he knew he had to make amends. However, Esther was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was a note on the kitchen table, written in her neat handwriting. Erin read it quickly. Erin, I understand everything now. Your words last night opened my eyes. I thought we could rekindle our relationship, our love and closeness. But we've both changed, you and me. Perhaps no one is to blame. It just happened. I know who you spent the night with. A beautiful young woman with red hair. I went to the restaurant last night, but didn't intend to ruin your evening. I wanted to tell you I was leaving, to say it to your face. I saw you getting into a taxi together, your looks, words and gestures leaving no doubt. You have the right to do as you please, but so do I. I can't live like this anymore. I'll file for divorce myself. The children are grown, so it will be quick. I don't want any of your assets. I know everything is in your name. I always trusted you more than anyone else. Goodbye. Aaron put down the note, overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. On one hand, he was now free, which was good. He could invite whoever he wanted and arrange the house to his liking. On the other hand, he felt a pang in his chest. His feelings for Esther had not entirely faded. She was still important to him. Memories of their youth flooded back, how they understood each other without words, supported and cared for each other. It was Esther who had encouraged Aaron in difficult times, giving him hope and comfort. The phone rang. It was Lily. A warm wave seemed to wash over Aaron. "I've missed you already," a youthful, vibrant voice echoed through the receiver. The man pictured her, and a shiver ran down his spine. "Me too, baby. Come over, and we'll pick a trip to the sea together. I want to show you some incredibly beautiful places." "Oh, come to you? What about your wife?" "I told you we're practically strangers now, in the midst of a divorce." "So it's true. I thought it was just the usual excuses from a married man." "No, I'm being honest with you." After Aaron left for the corporate event, Esther immediately pulled off her turquoise dress. Not long ago it had seemed beautiful to her, but now it filled her with disgust, though in truth the dress was blameless and Esther knew it. She called Martha sobbing into the phone, and she arrived in less than half an hour. The friends sat in the kitchen for a long time, discussing the situation over a glass of wine, pondering what to do next, reminiscing and even laughing. Esther was glad she had called Martha. "I never told you this before. I didn't want to meddle in your relationship, but Aaron has been treating you like an object for a long time. It's very noticeable from the outside," Martha confessed. Then, getting too excited and brave over wine, they decided to go to the restaurant. Esther intended to tell Aaron she was leaving him. She just wanted to scare her husband, give him time to realize how bad he would feel without her, how much he valued her. According to their plan, Aaron would understand and change his attitude towards his wife. Then Esther would return, and they would live happily again. But outside the restaurant, the stunned friends witnessed an interesting scene. Aaron embracing a young, beautiful girl, getting into a taxi. They kissed periodically. "Well," Martha said as the taxi sped away, "it's a good thing we caught them. Now you know everything." Esther nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. She knew she could never forgive her husband for this. Esther went to Martha's place. She lived with her son in a spacious 3-bedroom apartment and offered the living room to Esther. In the morning, Esther returned home to collect her things and documents and realized her husband hadn't been there yet. It's clear he spent the night with that red-haired beauty in some hotel. I wonder how he planned to explain himself to me, his lawful wife. He probably would have said urgent business came up, and he had to go to the office straight from the corporate event to solve some problems. That often happened, and now Esther knew that not all of her husband's stories about work were true. Often they were just cover-ups for meetings with his mistress, or mistresses. Esther didn't know what the future held. It seemed uncertain. She knew it would be tough, but it was better than living with a liar and a traitor who didn't value her. Besides, Martha promised to help to support her. "No woman has ever disappeared without a man," her friend declared. She was outraged that Esther would get nothing after the divorce. Learning that all the property was in Aaron's relatives' names, she was furious. "What a scoundrel! He planned everything in advance? And you kept quiet. How could you let this happen?" "He said it was to pay fewer taxes, and I never thought anything bad would happen." "Well, you trusted him too much." Esther sighed. Yes, she had trusted Aaron more than herself, as it turned out, mistakenly. Aaron returned from his oceanfront vacation alone, his emotions in disarray, distressed and confused. The red-haired beauty Lily had caused a sensation at the expensive resort. At first Aaron was pleased, even proud. What a beauty, and she was with him. All the men turned their heads. But somehow, without him noticing, Lily suddenly shifted her affections to a young, handsome, and very wealthy businessman from Germany. "You shameless creature!" Aaron threw a farewell to the happy Lily. However, his words didn't faze her. The young beauty merely smiled her dazzling smile. His home greeted him with silence and emptiness. He ordered food from a restaurant and retrieved a bottle of rum from the bar, drinking it alone until he couldn't remember anything. So bleak was his mood. However, Aaron didn't wallow in misery for long. After Lily, there was Kate. He met her at a club, a tanned, dark-eyed brunette, vibrant, slender and cheerful. They moved in together almost immediately. Aaron enjoyed seeing the young beauty around the house. Her appearance in short shorts inspired and delighted him. But the house gradually fell into disarray. Dust rolled in clumps through the rooms and hallways, and the pots in the kitchen remained untouched. Kate did nothing around the house. This led to arguments. Aaron demanded at least a minimal level of comfort at home, but Kate shouted back that she wasn't hired as a maid. Eventually she left. Aaron sighed in relief. The young beauty had begun to irritate him. After her, there were other women. Beautiful, young, but somehow too flighty, superficial and foolish. Then Aaron met Victoria. She was older than his previous partners, but looked stunning at nearly 30. She had a fantastic figure, velvety grey eyes and long hair the colour of milk chocolate. Victoria was intelligent and good to talk to. She worked a lot, but still found time to cook delicious dinners occasionally. If she couldn't, she would order food from a restaurant herself. Aaron relaxed and almost felt happy. It seemed he had found the perfect combination of qualities he valued: beauty, intelligence, and domesticity. Victoria was simply ideal. They lived together for about 3 months when Victoria brought up the topic of children. This was something Aaron hadn't expected. He had no desire to raise children again. The snot, the crying, the nighttime wake-ups, the toys and crumbs everywhere. And Victoria would start turning into a frumpy housewife, just like Esther had. No, thank you. In the end, Aaron and Victoria talked and realised they had entirely different plans for their lives. Victoria packed her things and left, thanking Aaron for his honesty. She wanted children, and Aaron wasn't the right partner for that. Aaron threw himself into work. Fleeting relationships no longer brought him joy. The empty, vast house was frightening and oppressive in its silence. His relationship with his children was strained. They had always been closer to their mother, and after the divorce, his daughters were angry with him. They had every right to be. He had treated Esther poorly and left her with nothing. Jason, his eldest son, occasionally answered his calls. It was from that Aaron learned about Esther's life and realized that the reconciliation he had hoped for was no longer possible. Esther didn't stay with Martha for long. Soon she found a job and was able to rent an apartment. Esther was hired at a company in the lowest position. She didn't expect more, having no experience. Starting from scratch at her age was difficult, but everything turned out wonderfully. The new employee quickly proved herself to be hard-working, eager to learn, and responsible. In less than 2 years, Esther became the head of her department, a meteoric career rise. Esther loved her work. She had long dreamed of feeling needed and important. She felt truly happy. She continued going to the gym with Martha, which greatly benefited her health and figure. Esther became a regular at the cosmetologist, changed her image, learned to wear light makeup that accentuated her features and concealed minor flaws. She made new friends and enjoyed spending time with them. One day, a man named Glenn visited their office on business. Esther helped him find his way to the manager's office. Along the way, they got to know each other. At first, Esther thought she was imagining it, that Glenn was looking at her with admiration and interest, even flirting. But could that be possible at her age? Men preferred young beauties, as Aaron had recently demonstrated. But when Glenn directly asked for her number, showering her with compliments, all doubts vanished. Esther and Glenn had similar stories. He was also divorced because his wife had cheated on him while he was at work. He left the family, taking only his toothbrush. His children, who were adults, took his side. The more Esther got to know Glenn, the clearer it became that he was the perfect partner for her. They enjoyed each other's company, never wanting to part, so they quickly moved in together and eventually formalized their relationship. Martha was thrilled for her friend. "You've blossomed with him. You look younger and you're glowing from within. That's true happiness." "And it's all thanks to the dress," Esther smiled. "That very one. Even though it was turquoise, it served as a red flag to a bull." "I don't know," Martha disagreed. "I think it was bound to happen. If not the dress, something else would have been the catalyst." Still, Esther was grateful to the dress. It now held a place of honor in her wardrobe. Sometimes she wore it on walks with Glenn, and he never failed to admire how the color brought out the shade of his beloved's eyes.